Chapter 610, Mystical Treasure Hall. Stretching his back, Zhang Xian walked out of his room. Cultivating an entire month on the journey here had left him rather exhausted. Teacher. Upon walking out of his room, Yuan Tao immediately rushed forward with a bitter face. Teacher, somehow, I feel that my cultivation seems to have slowed. For some reason, I find myself unable to concentrate. Zhao Ye and Lu Chang's departure had left an immense pressure of the 4 remaining students. For fear of lagging behind, Yuan Tao had been working extra hard, but for the past half a month, it was as if he had been shackled, preventing him from advancing no matter how hard he pushed. Afraid that his teacher might reprimand him, he also dared not ask Zhang Xian about it. But eventually, he came to the limit of his tolerance. The final trigger was Wang Ying's recent breakthrough. If he didn't solve his issue soon, the gap between him and the others would widen significantly. There's no need to worry. I know of your condition, and it's not due to your lack of concentration or talent. Rather, your cultivation has reached a point where if you don't further awaken your emperor's bloodline, it will hinder your future progress. Zhang Xian replied. He had noticed Yuan Tao's condition a few days ago on the back of the spirit beast. It wasn't that he wasn't working hard enough, but that the bloodline running through his body was shackling him. If one possessing a unique constitution were to fully awaken their potential, they would be able to achieve breakthroughs as easily as eating and drinking. But if they were to be unable to do so, it would bind them instead, rendering their cultivation useless. Due to the very low number of people possessing unique constitutions, it was extremely difficult to find a clear heritage to awakening them. As such, many talented individuals had found their hopes being snapped due to being unable to find a way to awaken their unique constitution further or lacking the required resource for it. This was precisely the reason why Zhang Xian eventually agreed to allow Zhao Ye to go to the Glacier Plain Court. The Glacier Plain Court had a complete heritage for the purine body and plentiful resources to groom her. This was much better than Zhang Xian fumbling around for a solution. The current Yuan Tao was also facing such a problem. He had awakened his physical constitution by 20% and reaching Transcendent Mortal 2 Dan primary stage was already his limit. If he wanted to grow any further, he would have continued awakening his unique constitution. Otherwise, his emperor's bloodline would shackle his acupoints and meridians, preventing him from making any progress. If he could cultivate the complete version of Heaven's Path Divine Art, he wouldn't face such problems at all. It was a pity that he could only learn the simplified version. Zhang Xian had been thinking over the matter for the past few days, and he found a few viable solutions. Alright. Relay my instructions to Sun Chang, tell him to find out if there's any place that sells artifacts around here. I'll look for some artifacts that can resolve your problem. Zhang Xian replied. Yes. Seeing that his teacher already knew about the matter, Yuan Tao felt a little embarrassed. He quickly left, and a while later, he returned with Sun Chang beside him. Young master, I've had someone look into the surroundings, and there's a mystical treasure hall in the vicinity, and you might find what you want there. Sun Chang replied. Knowing his job as a butler, he had been gathering information ever since the group arrived here, and he learned quite a few things as well. Mystical Treasure Hall? Zhang Xian asked doubtfully. That's right. The Mystical Treasure Hall sells all kinds of unique and valuable artifacts. There are even a few whose worth is comparable to a spirit high-tier artifact. However, what is bizarre is that the owner never sells the goods. Rather, he gives it to those fated with him. Replied Sun Chang. Gives away. Zhang Xian was taken aback. No matter how many valuable, unique collectibles, artifacts, and wealth one had, wouldn't one go bankrupt if one were to give away everything? That's right. But while I use the word gives, there's actually a price to pay. Seeing the look of disbelief on the young master's face, Sun Chang chuckled. It's said that there are 2 rows of stone pillars within the mystical treasure hall. Through some unknown technology, there is an artifact hidden within each stone pillar, and those who intend to obtain any goods from the store would have to identify the artifacts inside the stone pillar. The store works by a progressive point system. The first artifact identified from the stone pillar will award 1 point, the second artifact identified will award 2 points, the third artifact identified will award 3 points, so on and so forth. In other words, once one identifies one's 50th stone pillar, one will be awarded 50 points straight. One can trade the points obtained from the identification of the artifacts for any treasure placed on the shelves of the mystical treasure hall. With sufficient points, one can obtain anything one wants. However, one has to pay 10 middle-tier spirit stones before attempting the identification, and if one is able to identify even one of the artifacts hidden in the stone pillars, the spirit stones will be refunded. On the other hand, failure to do so means that the spirit stones go to the shop. Oh! Zhang Xian came to a realization. In other words, the shop was leveraging on the curiosity of others to create something similar to a gambling den. The artifacts were hidden in the stone pillars, making it nearly impossible to identify them through guesswork. Earning points would surely be difficult. Even though 10 middle-tier spirit stones weren't much, the shop should be rather profitable if it could attract a crowd. In a sense, it was somewhat similar to the harmonious stream of flowing goblet in Honghai City Appraiser Hall. It hinged mainly on one's eye of discernment. It might be difficult for anyone else to identify those artifacts, but to Zhang Xian, those were as good as giveaways. With a touch, a book would be formed in the Library of Heaven's Path, and he would be able to identify even the 18 generations of one's ancestors. To him, identifying an artifact in a stone pillar was a walk in the park. Let's go and take a look. If there's anything useful to Yuan Tao, we can try to obtain it. If not, we'll just continue looking around. Zhang Xian showed a slight smile. To awaken Yuan Tao's physical constitution, certain unique items were required. If the mystical treasure hall possessed these items, Zhang Xian would identify the artifacts in some stone pillars to obtain them. While it was likely that Zhang Xian would be able to easily identify everything in the shop, he didn't think that it was appropriate for him to do so. After all, a master teacher should behave in a way befitting of one. It would be inappropriate for him to grab all of the treasures of another when the other party was simply conducting his business. Besides, in a foreign place such as Huanyu Empire, it was best for him to maintain a low profile. Yes. Nodding his head, Sun Chang walked forward and led the way. Since they were looking for a treasure relating to Yuan Tao's constitution, naturally, he tagged along as well. The mystical treasure hall wasn't too far away from the royal palace. After a short 20-minute walk, they found themselves standing before a majestic, towering building. 3 grandly written words, Mystical Treasure Hall, were written on a board hung above the entrance. These words absorbed spiritual energy from the surroundings, and it felt as though they would leap out from the surface at any moment. A 6th-level calligraphy. Upon seeing it, Zhang Xian was stunned. A 6th-level calligraphy has already reached the level of spiritual wisdom. Even a 5-star painter would find it hard to produce a work of this tier. Seeing such a work before entering the mystical treasure hall, Zhang Xian's interest in it intensified. Walking through the door, they arrived at an exceptionally vast main hall. There were shelves placed by the walls, and all kinds of artifacts filled its surface. The 3 men walked over to take a closer look. Sword, painting, chess, or spirit beast fur. There were indeed all kinds of treasures here. The golden talon of a transcendent mortal for Dan Fox Eagle Beast. Walking along the shelf, Zhang Xian suddenly came to a stop. Placed on the shelf before him was a meter-long, giant, golden talon, and it felt both cold and sharp. The Fox Eagle Beast was a transcendent mortal for Dan's spirit beast. Not only were there very few of them, they were also extremely cunning. Even the Beast Hall would be troubled to find one of them, needless to say, capture or kill one. And the talons of this rare beast were exceptionally valuable treasures. This was especially so for those that were golden in color. It was the ideal material to forging a spirit intermediate tier pinnacle weapon. Many people would die to obtain even just a small piece of its talons, and yet, there was a complete one here. Its price was inestimable. Lowering his head to take a closer look, he saw a goatskin label placed beneath the claw, and written on it was, Golden Talon of the Fox Eagle Beast, 1. Zhang Xian couldn't help but ask Sun Chang, what does this 1 mean? Sun Chang pondered for a moment quickly before replying. The 1 refers to the number of points required to trade for it. One can trade for this with just a single point. Zhang Xian was stunned. The golden talon of a fox eagle beast was incomparably rare and valuable. If one were to put it in an auction, it would be worth dozens of spirit stones. And yet, one could trade for it with just a single point. Wasn't the worth of the points here a little, way too high? The items on the first floor can be traded with just 1 point. The higher one ascends, the more valuable the items become. Sun Chang smiled. I can trade for any one of these items with just 1 point. Shocked, Zhang Xian breathed in a large mouthful of cold air. He suddenly could see why anyone would come and try their luck despite the seeming impossibility of the task. The items on display were simply too valuable. Moving along, Zhang Xian saw a few more valuable items whose worth weren't beneath that of the fox eagle beast's talon, and labeled on the goatskins beneath them were 1 as well. Impressed, Zhang Xian exclaimed, impressive. This place indeed lives up to the words, mystical treasure. Soon, he finished looking around the first floor. Even though the items on the first floor were indeed valuable, none of them were truly effective in awakening Yuan Tao's unique constitution. The emperor's bloodline was special even among unique constitutions. While Zhang Xian wasn't too sure what items would work, he had a rough idea in mind. Let's move on to the second floor. Knowing that there was nothing he needed on the first floor, Zhang Xian lost his interest. To Zhang Xian, no matter how good an artifact or item was, its worth couldn't possibly exceed that of spirit stones or cultivation technique manuals. As such, he didn't bear much interest in such stuff. Otherwise, he wouldn't have returned the artifacts he claimed from the harmonious streaming of flowing goblets back to the appraiser hall back then. The 3 men moved on to the second floor. There were significantly fewer people on the second floor, and the number and variety of items were also more limited as well. But with just a glance, it was clear that the items here were much more valuable. There were many one-of-kind artifacts and items that, despite Zhang Xian's extensive knowledge, he couldn't name. This is a painting of the 7th level. Soon, Zhang Xian saw a painting of the 7th level. Judging from its quality, the painter who created it must be at least 6-star in rank. The animals and plants inside were so lifelike that it felt as though they were truly living beings that would leap out of the painting at any moment. A painting at the level of enlightened spirit already possessed spirit and sentience, and the creatures within were capable of leaving the painting on their own accord. Taking a closer look, he saw a line of words written on the goatskin below, proud conception of spring and autumn, 2. It's worth only 2 points. Zhang Xian was astonished. This painting was much better than Rousing from the Drunken Dreams that was auctioned in Honghai City back then. After all, the creation of that painting was a mistake in itself. Even though it barely managed to reach the 7th level under Zhang Xian's hands, it was ranked amidst the lowest within that tier, and it was eventually sold for only 20,000 low-tier spirit stones, which was equivalent to 2 middle-tier spirit stones. On the other hand, this was a masterpiece left behind by a 6-star painter. If placed in an auction, its price would surely soar above 50 middle-tier spirit stones. To think that its value would only be 2 here. This mystical treasure hall was indeed fearsome. The range and value of the treasures displayed here had far exceeded his expectations. Just as Zhang Xian was about to continue browsing around, a faint voice echoed from the stairway, and soon, 2 figures could be seen walking over. How can one find anything good in this remote place? If there's anything you want, I can get it for you after we return. Chapter 611, Inner Core of Great River Snake. It was man and a lady. The both of them carried a dignified air around them. The lady walking in front was dressed in light yellow, tight-fitting clothes that outlined her beautiful figure. Her long, Black hair that fell on her shoulder contrasted with her fair skin, and she had a slender waist where one could easily hold. Her outer appearance was in no way beneath that of Mou or Zhao Feiwu. The man beside her seemed to be in his 30s. He had a broad figure with a well-defined face. There was a hint of authoritativeness etched between his brows, indicating that he was likely to be a person of high standing. Nevertheless, Zhang Xian wasn't interested in the other party's appearance. In terms of beauty, there was no one who could compare up to Zhao Ye, and Mou and Zhao Feiwu were top-notch beauties as well. Yet, he didn't pay much heed to the three of them, so of course he wouldn't gawk at a lady whom he didn't recognize. But taking a look at the other party's cultivation, he was shocked. Even though the two of them were young, their cultivation was exceptional. They gave a feeling reminiscent of the deep ocean or endless abyss. They were definitely stronger than Hongshi. Transcendent Mortal 6 Dan. Zhang Xian's eyebrows shot up. Of the 28 regional powers, even the strongest expert hadn't reached Transcendent Mortal 6 Dan. Yet, just by walking around town, he had already met with two of them. Not to mention, the both of them were extremely young as well. As expected of Huanyu capital, it was indeed filled with experts. As expected, the might of the capital far exceeded that of the vassal states. There's no need for it. If you're bored, you can return first, the beautiful lady replied impassively, snubbing the other party's goodwill. From the look of it, the duo didn't seem to be close. Hee, how could I possibly be bored? If you wish to look around, I'll accompany you. The man laughed awkwardly. The duo continued walking around the shelves to take a look. Zhang Xian couldn't be bothered with the duo anymore, and he continued browsing through the items. To awaken the Emperor's bloodline, he would require the blood essence or inner core of spirit beasts with similar attributes, or some unique medicinal herb, and such. But these items were extremely rare and finding them was no easy task. Purple Dawn Pearl. This artifact can cleanse the dirt from the person carrying it, thus making them immaculate. Zhang Xian's eyes fell on a round pearl. He had read a record of it before. It was a peculiar artifact that specialized neither in offense nor defense, but even so, it was an accessory that cultivators liked to carry around. After all, the one wearing it could keep their clothes in pristine condition, thus maintaining a glowing appearance even without bathing. To think that this item would actually be a tool as well. Zhang Xian shook his head. To think that a 7th level painting would be of the same price as this item. It seemed like the mystical treasure hall didn't arrange artifacts by value but by rarity. While a purple dawn pearl couldn't be said to be a necessity for cultivators, it was an extremely rare artifact, and it was deeply fancied by most ladies. After all, given the broad continent, a single flight could easily take days, and during which, one would be unable to bathe. The feeling of being dirty would feel incredibly uncomfortable to some. However, with this artifact, one could remain clean at all moments, needless to say a month or two, even if one were to walk around in the same clothes for an entire year, one's appearance would still be immaculate. It was highly valued precisely because of its rarity. Even so, part of the reason why it was priced equally with the painting was also because paintings were impractical in battle. As such, its value was beneath that of weapons and other practical mystical artifacts. However, this restriction was only limited for paintings up to the 7th level. Once a painting reached the 8th level or even higher, it would gain the ability to realize illusions. For example, some of the more formidable paintings could even form a massive city that could trap a cultivator within it for an eternity to come. As such, the value of 8th level paintings was immeasurable. Every single occupation that had been officially recognized by the Master-Teacher Pavilion wields immense might upon reaching its pinnacle. Ordinary men can't hope to stand against such mystical abilities. Taking the celestial chess for example, it was said that those who had reached the highest level in it would be able to manipulate the world as though it were their chessboard. Taking the stars as the stones, they could maneuver the essence of the world and reverse yin and yang. However, it was a pity that what Hongshi received was an incomplete manual. Even the inheritance from the puppet was incomplete, thus making it impossible to unleash such might. Looking on, Zhang Xian soon browsed through all artifacts in the second floor, but he was still unable to find anything suitable. Thus, along with the other two, they proceeded up to the third floor. The artifacts on the third floor were much more valuable. The labeling of each artifact was no longer uniform, some were labeled with a 3, some a 4, and some a 5. Walking along the shelves, Zhang Xian saw a 6th-level painting labeled 4. It was even more expensive than the 7th-level painting from before. Perplexed, Zhang Xian pondered for a moment before coming to a realization. Even though this painting might be a tier lower than the previous one seen, it was a masterpiece left behind by a very famous painter in Huanyu Empire. This piece was said to be a magnum opus that he put his final breath into drawing after suffering fatal injuries in a duel. Contained within it was the lingering will and resentment of a 5-star painter, thus making it exceptionally valuable. Naturally, its price would also be marked up to reflect that. This is a spirit intermediate tier pinnacle sword. Soon, Zhang Xian saw a weapon on the shelf. His swordsmanship was impressive, but he had never been able to find a suitable weapon. If he could wield one fitting of his current cultivation, his fighting prowess would surely soar significantly. This sword was even higher ranked than the ones he had seen at Honghai City. Its sharp, cold gleam could induce a freezing sensation in those that set its eyes upon it. Glacier Rain Sword, 6. Such was written on the goatskin label beneath it. It is actually worth 6 points. Zhang Xian was stunned. He had seen many spirit intermediate tier weapons in the shop, but those were only labeled 1. Yet, this sword was actually priced at 6, wasn't this a little way too exaggerated? Sensing Zhang Xian's doubt, an attendant walked over to him and explained, Gongzi, this sword was personally forged by Master Blacksmith Hu Qingzi, and it is an upgradable artifact. It can undergo another round of tempering, thus making it incomparably valuable. It is nothing like those ordinary weapons displayed below. Upgradable artifact. Zhang Xian froze for a moment before nodding his head. While he had never officially learned smithing before, he had collected quite a few books on the topic, and he knew of the various jargons in it. Typically, a weapon was considered to be complete once its form became fixed. If one were to put it through another round of tempering, there was a good chance it might lose its sharpness and be rendered useless. But upgradable artifacts were different. If one were to find better ores in the future, one could meld it into the artifact during the tempering process, thus raising the weapon's quality and possibly its tier. In other words, while this artifact might be a spirit intermediate tier weapon at the moment, it was impossible to predict how strong it could become in the future. In that sense, it was indeed worthy of its pricing of 6. The inner core of a great river snake. While Zhang Xian was interested in the sword, he wasn't in a rush to obtain it. Instead, he continued looking on, but right after he barely took 2 steps, his eyes suddenly lit up. Placed on a shelf not too far away was a round inner core of a spirit beast. It was crimson in color, and it exuded a searing aura. The inner core of a transcendent mortal 7-dan spirit beast, Great River Snake. The Great River Snake was a spirit beast that lives in marshlands in mountain valleys. It had thick scales that granted it incredible defensive capability. But while its body was cold as though metal, its inner core was fiery like coal, leaving one with a sensation as though one would be incinerated. The Great River Snake possesses the dragon bloodline, so it should be able to awaken Yuan Tao's Emperor's bloodline. Zhang Xian smiled. While the Great River Snake was considered to be a type of snake, it possessed the bloodline of a flood dragon. On top of that, it was also a spirit beast possessing superior defensive ability, which was aligned with the Emperor's bloodline. Lowering his glance to take a look, he saw the label on the goatskin, inner core of a Great River Snake, 10. 10 points. But it's indeed worth this much. Only a transcendent mortal 8-dan expert could hunt and procure the inner core of a transcendent mortal 7-dan spirit beast. As such, it was no surprise that it would be labeled 10. I'll be taking this. Zhang Xian made an internal decision. However, the searing aura of the inner core is too strong, and I'll need some medicinal herbs to mediate its properties. I wonder if I can find anything suitable here. Having found something suitable for Yuan Tao, Zhang Xian nodded his head in satisfaction. He continued to browse through the shop in hopes of finding a medicinal herb with mediating properties when a faint voice suddenly sounded. I want this sorrow-severing grass. How much is it? It was the voice of a female. Glancing over, it was the dashing man and beautiful lady he had met back on the second floor. Unbeknownst to Zhang Xian, the both of them had come up to the third floor as well. Sorrow-severing grass. Zhang Xian's eyes lit up. Sorrow-severing grass was a medicinal herb possessing cold attribute. It had a gentle nature, and it was exceptionally potent in neutralizing fiery properties. On top of that, it nourished and formed a layer of protection around one's inner organs and meridians, thus making it the best possible medicinal herb to go along with the inner core of Great River Snake. Replying this lady over here, our mystical treasure hall doesn't sell our treasure through normal means. If you wish to purchase anything, you will have to earn points and trade for it. The attendant managing the third floor quickly hurried over and explained. Points? What do you mean by points? The young man beside her frowned. Our mystical treasure hall has 2 rows of stone pillars on the 4th floor, and sealed within them are artifacts of all kinds. If one successfully identifies them within the time limit, one will be given points. The more artifacts one recognizes, the more points one earns. The attendant quickly went through the rules. It was exactly the same as how Sun Cheng described it, but it was even more detailed. How troublesome. But since it's just identifying artifacts, there should be no problem at all. Hearing that there's such a complex procedure in work here, the young man frowned. But following which, his face beamed with confidence, and he turned to the lady before him and said, 6th. Young mistress, wait here for a moment. I'll bring some points to you right now. A look of displeasure flashed across the face of the lady known as the 6th young mistress upon hearing her companion's words. I don't need your help. I'll earn the points myself. Waving her hands, she turned to the attendant and said, lead the way. I wish to take a look. Yes. Seeing that someone was interested in challenging the stone pillars, the attendant quickly led the duo up to the next floor. Let's follow them. Zhang Xian beckoned for the other 2. The aim of his visit here was to find something to awaken Yuan Tao's unique constitution, and to procure those items, he would need to earn points as well. Following behind the attendant's group onto the 4th floor, a vast room appeared before him. Dozens of stone pillars were placed neatly in 2 rows in the middle. They had a smooth exterior, and it was impossible to tell how it was carved. There were a few people shaking their heads before the stone pillars, depressed. There's no need to be depressed, it's fine to not identify anything. The chuckle of an old man sounded in front. It seemed like these fellows who were shaking their heads had challenged the stone pillars only to end in failure. Zhang Xian glanced over and realized that they were wearing the robe of their occupation appraiser. In fact, 2 of them were even 4-star appraisers. Considering how even a 4-star appraiser failed in this challenge, it seemed like this test wasn't as easy as it looked. Hall Master, these 2 wished to challenge the stone pillars as well. The attendant walked over to the old man and gestured to the young man and young lady. This old man was the Hall Master of the Mystical Treasure Hall, Gan Yiping. All right. Gan Yiping nodded. Turning his head over, he smiled. I'll have to trouble you to pay the deposit first. Zhang Xian froze for a moment before a sheepish expression covered his face. Deposit? Right, I forgot that I don't have any money to pay the deposit. Chapter 612, Challenging the Stone Pillars. Too intent on winning some points, Zhang Xian forgot that he only had a high-tier spirit stone on him. Even though he had procured 600 middle-tier spirit stones from Fleeting Cloud's sect and the other powers previously, he had already used up all of them before reaching Huanyu Empire. The current him was as good as bankrupt. The young man, unaware of the rules, asked, "How much is the deposit?" 10 middle-tier spirit stones. Gan Yiping replied. "Here you are. The both of us want to give it a try." Without asking any questions, the young man flicked his wrist and passed 20 middle-tier spirit stones over. Others would have to sell all of their property just to gather 20 middle-tier spirit stones, and yet, it seemed to be nothing to this young man at all. Grabbing the spirit stones, Gan Yiping chuckled. Gesturing to the stone pillars, he went through the rules. Contained within these stone pillars is an artifact each. There's a hint inscribed on each of the stone pillars, and based on that, one has to deduce what kind of artifact is hidden in it. Every challenger is only given an incense's time, and as long as one successfully names the artifact, the stone pillar will break apart. The more stone pillars that break apart, the more points one will earn. All right. Nodding his head, the young man turned to the young lady beside him and said, "Sixth young mistress, wait here for me. I'll return quickly." After which, he walked over to the stone pillar. Zhang Xian and group also looked at him curiously. They knew of the rules, but it might still prove to be useful to see how the challenge would go and how difficult it would be. Standing before the first stone pillar, the young man read the hint inscribed on it before circling around the pillar. Slowly, a crack appeared on his confident face, and confusion started to seep through. There wasn't any unique mark on the smooth stone pillar, making it impossible to see, feel, or even determine the shape of the artifact at all. To guess the identity of an artifact through a layer of stone was more difficult than he had expected. Walking another 2 rounds around the stone pillars, his face turned livid. He had just boasted in front of the 6th young mistress that he would be back soon. He thought that he could return with some points to win the favor of the beauty, and yet, he ended up being unable to recognize anything at all. He would be extremely embarrassed if he were to return like that. Scratching his head, the young man began to panic. He placed his palm on the stone pillar and tried to infuse his Zhenqi in. However, the stone pillar seemed to possess the ability to ward off Zhenqi, rendering his actions futile. Soon, he tried everything he could think of and he indignantly turned to look at Gan Yiping. "Hall Master, there's nothing distinctive about your stone pillars at all. How are we supposed to guess? Isn't this a scam? How in the world do you expect me to guess what is within the stone pillar without any conclusive clue? Even a 6-star appraiser would be helpless before these stone pillars. Gongzi, you need not panic. There's a clue on the stone pillars, you can make a deduction based on it." As though having guessed that the other party would say these words, Gan Yiping smiled faintly. "Make a deduction?" Turning to look at the words on the stone pillars, the young man's confusion only seemed to deepen. Seeing that an incense's time was about to pass, he could only grit his teeth and make some guesses. Sword, saber, medicinal herb, wooden bat. He listed several things at the top of his mind consecutively, but there was no response at all. "Time's up." Gan Yiping shook his head with a bitter smile. He could tell that this young man was extraordinary, and he thought that the other party's presence could finally bring some progress to the uncovering of the stone pillar. But from the looks of it now, he was thinking too much into it. "All right." With a scarlet, stifled face, the young man walked back with an awkward expression. What was this? He thought that it would just be like normal treasure speculation, and with his capability, he would surely be able to easily determine the type and name of the artifact. After winning some points, he would be able to buy whatever the 6th young mistress wanted and win her heart. Who knew that his attempt would end in such tragic failure? His attempt to show off only ended in humiliation. Sensing the other party's poor mood, Gan Yiping consoled him. "Gongzi, you need not be disheartened. I found these stone pillars in some ruins a long time ago. I don't know who left them behind, but they seem to possess some mysterious ability. Despite observing them daily over the course of 50 years, I was only able to decipher 3 of them. 50 years? 3? The young man was taken aback. Indeed. Only after knowing what the artifact inside is, along with its precise effects, can one open the stone pillars. I've tried all kinds of ways to open them throughout the years but to no avail. That is the reason why I opened this mystical treasure hall to borrow the wisdom of others. Gan Yiping shook his head. Actually, there's no need for you to worry. The rule of an incense's time is only to allow the others behind to take a look as well. Since you've already paid the deposit of 10 middle-tier spirit stones, you can copy the text imprinted on the stone pillar to take back with you. If you were to decipher it, you can return anytime, and I won't charge you the deposit again. Return anytime? The young man shook his head. We're only passing by Huanyu Empire, and we won't be staying for too long. Besides, I'm only interested in that single medicinal herb. If not for the 6th young mistress insisting on coming here, given his identity and pride, he would have never come to such a remote location. While this mystical treasure hall possessed plentiful of valuable items, given his family background, it wouldn't be too difficult for him to find and obtain something similar to them as well. All right. Seeing the lack of interest in the latter, a hint of disappointment flashed across Gan Yiping's eyes. Shaking his head, he said with a slightly downcast voice, I've devoted half of my life to these stone pillars, it seems like I'll have to carry my regrets with me to my coffin. His lifespan. Hearing the other party's lamentation, Zhang Xian couldn't help but shake his head. While this old man possessed extraordinary strength, there was a declining air shrouding his body. Clearly, his lifespan was reaching its limit. Upon stepping into transcendent mortal one Dan, one's level of existence would undergo a qualitative breakthrough, thus increasing one's lifespan significantly. Living to 200 wouldn't be a problem at all. After which, with a rise in cultivation, one's lifespan would also increase correspondingly, but the increase would be minimal. As such, unless one advanced to Saint Realm, one would only be able to live to 200 or so, 300 if one maintained one's physical condition well. This old man's lifespan was beyond 250, and it was clear he was nearing his end already. Having dug out so many mysterious stone pillars, he was determined to uncover the secrets behind them. Yet, his own capability proved to be limited, so he could only establish with mystical treasure hall and put out all of the treasures he had collected throughout his lifetime to attract others. As for the deposit of 10 middle-tier spirit stones, it was actually just a benchmark. Otherwise, if everyone were to come and try their luck every day, the truly capable appraisers might find themselves being squeezed out. Unable to obtain even a single point, the young man glanced at the young lady apologetically. 6th young mistress, I'm truly sorry. I'll take a look. The difficulty of the challenge had piqued the competitive spirit of the 6th young mistress. She immediately proceeded over to the first stone pillar, and upon seeing the words, a deep frown appeared on her forehead as well. It didn't take long for an incense's time to pass, and she couldn't help but shake her head in disappointment. Clearly, she was helpless before the stone pillars as well. A pity it is. Seeing how the both of them failed to decipher the stone pillar, Gan Yiping sighed. The duo's cultivation and disposition were extraordinary, and without a doubt, they were clearly rare geniuses. He thought that they would be able to bring some kind of breakthrough to this research, but who knew that they wouldn't be able to solve even a single one of these pillars. Hall Master, pleased to meet you. I'm a master teacher. Seeing that the 6th young mistress failed as well, the young man stepped forward, flicked his wrist, and an emblem appeared in his hands. 5 stars. Gan Yiping's eyes narrowed. He was able to tell that there was something extraordinary about the duo with a single glance, but he thought that they were just esteemed nobles from a prestigious clan. Never in his dreams did he expect that they would be 5-star master teachers. If a master teacher of this caliber were to enter the capital, even His Majesty would have to welcome them with the most elaborate of ceremonies. That's right. We've came to Huanyu Empire to deal with some matters. Your sorrow-severing grass is of utmost importance to me, so may I humbly request you to sell it to me. I'm willing to offer double, triple, or even quintuple the price. Seeing that the other party seemed to be stunned by his identity, the young man nodded his head in satisfaction. No matter where a 5-star master teacher went, he would be well respected. You wish to buy my sorrow-severing grass? Gan Yiping asked. That's right. The young man nodded. I truly have an important need for that herb, so I hope that you can grant my request. A moment later, Gan Yiping said, how about this? I won't accept your money, but as long as you conduct a lesson for me, I don't mind giving the sorrow-severing grass to you. His lifespan was already nearing its limits, and if he could achieve a breakthrough, he might still be able to live for a couple more years. Since the person before him was a 5-star master teacher, there was a chance that the other party might be able to help him. Besides, it had been 20 years since the mystical treasure hall opened, but no one had yet to decipher the stone pillars. Waiting on like that might be futile. Instead of obstinately sticking to his rules, he might as well give it away generously in exchange for getting acquainted with a 5-star master teacher. All right. Initially, the young man didn't bear much hope. Thus, upon hearing those words, his face flushed with delight, and he hurriedly nodded his head. A lesson didn't mean anything much to him. There's no need to stand on ceremony. Gan Yiping waved his hands casually. Turning to the attendant, he instructed, go down to the 3rd floor, wrap up the sorrow-severing grass carefully, and pass it to this gongzi. Yes. Nodding his head, the attendant was just about to leave when a voice sounded. Wait a moment. Following which, a fatty stepped forward. Sun Chang. The young master was here to look for certain items to help young master Yuan Tao awaken his unique constitution. While the young master didn't say anything, he noticed that the latter's eyes had stopped at the sorrow-severing grass for a slightly longer period of time. Clearly, it had caught his interest. If the other party were to take this one away, it would be difficult to procure another one. Naturally, Sun Chang had to stop him. What's wrong? Seeing a fatty step forward to interfere in his business, the young man frowned. Nothing much, I just think that this is a little unfair. Sun Chang turned to the elder and said, as the owner of the mystical treasure hall, since you established the rule that one can only trade for artifacts with points, you shouldn't make an exception for someone. Otherwise, that would compromise the integrity of your business. Since he had established rules, naturally he had to follow them. If he were to change his rules every now and then, how could he possibly expect others to follow them? Rules do need to be followed, but my lifespan is already coming to an end. Since there's little hope of deciphering the stone pillars, so I'll give up then. From today onward, the mystical treasure hall will be closed. Since I'm shutting down my business, the rules shouldn't matter anymore, right? Sighing, Gan Yiping shook his head. His lifespan was reaching its end, and nowadays, he felt his spirit drained. After decades of effort ending in futility, he knew that his chances were slim. Reluctant as he may be, he knew that it would be wiser for him to give up now. Little hope of deciphering the stone pillars? That's because our young master hasn't made a move yet. As long as he steps forth, everything you have here will be deciphered. Sun Chang harumphed. The 6th young mistress's face darkened upon hearing those words, and she harumphed coldly. Everything deciphered? You sure speak arrogantly. Chapter 613, A Bet with 6th Young Mistress. This 6th young mistress had just returned from the stone pillars, so she was unaware of the discussion the young man had with Gan Yiping. Having taken a look, she realized that she was helpless before these stone pillars as well. Even a knowledgeable genius like her was helpless before these stone pillars, and yet, this fellow actually bragged that he would be able to easily decipher everything. Intense displeasure immediately struck her, and she retorted angrily. Who do you think you are? Am I talking to you? Sun Chang glanced at the 6th young mistress with a proud stature. You. The 6th mistress was taken aback. What you? Sun Cheng flung his sleeves and tilted his head upward proudly. Can't you see I'm in the midst of talking to the hall master? This is no place for a fellow like you who couldn't even decipher a single stone pillar to interrupt. What did you say? The sixth young mistress nearly fainted from anger. To think that a 5-star master teacher, a transcendent mortal 6 Dan expert, would actually be looked down on by a transcendent mortal 2 Dan butler. Her chest puffed up in anger, and she nearly exploded on the spot. Audacious! Hearing the lady he was courting being insulted, the young man exclaimed in anger. Audacious? You still dare to speak? Just because I didn't talk about you, you think that you're any better than her? You also failed to solve any stone pillars and earn any points, and on top of that, you even tried to bend the rules after your failure. Do you think you are impressive just because you have that bit of money? Sun Cheng harumphed in disdain. What the heck do they think they are? Despite looking so decent, they actually tried to bribe the owner after their failure, even using their position to threaten him. How embarrassing. You are just a 5-star master teacher. Before our old master, even Hung Yuan Empire's pavilion master Mo Gaoyuan, a 6-star pinnacle master teacher, dare not utter anything. You. Seeing the other party's contemptuous glance, both the young man and the 6th young mistress were about to go insane. They were both incredible geniuses, people who would be respected no matter where they went. And yet, at this very moment, they were actually looked down by a mere butler. If not for their etiquette as a master teacher and nobles holding them back, they would have surely flown into a temper. Since you said that your young master is able to decipher the stone pillars, where is he? Why don't you invite him over to give it a try? Flinging his sleeves, the young man harumphed. I sure would like to see whether he's as incredible as you make him out to be. Even he himself couldn't decipher a single stone pillar, and yet this fellow dared to boast that his young master could solve everything cleanly. Are you jesting? At this moment, a helpless voice sounded by the side. The young master he's speaking of, seems to be referring to me. Following which, a young man with an awkward expression stepped forward. After hearing the hall master promising to sell the item, Zhang Xian wanted to step forward to say a thing or two. However, Sun Cheng managed to beat him to it, thus resulting in such a situation. This fellow had been rather reliable recently, so Zhang Xian thought it should be fine for him to do the talking. Who knew that the other party would actually have him pinned on a stake with just a few words? What the heck was this? If you speak like that, how am I going to keep a low profile? So, you are the one, who can decipher all of the stone pillars. The 6th young mistress harumphed coldly. Arrogant. She thought that the young master the other party talked about was some incredible figure, but it turned out to be a young man who wasn't even 20 yet. She couldn't help but feel repulsed by the other party. As a princess, not to mention one blessed with good looks, she had faced pursuers of all kinds. The most common type was those who thought that they were superior to others, such as this young man standing right before her at this moment. They liked to pretend they were something beyond their ability despite their ignorance. In her view, such actions were nothing more than foolishness. It's just words of flattery from my subordinate, please don't take it seriously. Seeing how he was detested before he could even say anything, Zhang Xian waved his hands sheepishly. Upon having his words refuted by his young master, Sun Cheng panicked. What words of flattery? Young master, those are just mere stone pillars, you should be able to decipher them easily. You should show these greenhorns what true capability is. Alright, stop spouting nonsense. Zhang Xian's face darkened. Didn't you hear that? The hall master has said that these stone pillars are hard to decipher. Despite 50 years of effort, only 3 of them have been solved to date. How could I possibly solve them easily? Young master. Enough. Interrupting the other party's words, Zhang Xian turned to the trio and apologized. Pardon me, it's due to my negligence that my butler got ahead of himself. Humph. Seeing the other party admit his mistake, the young man and the sixth young mistress's complexion improved slightly, and they tilted their heads up proudly. It's normal for a subordinate to speak up for his master, you don't have to worry about it. Gan Yiping replied. It was normal for a subordinate to be in awe of their master and believe that their master was capable of anything. Thank you, hall master, for your understanding. Seeing that the awkward situation had been resolved, Zhang Xian heaved a sigh of relief. Then, facing Gan Yiping, he asked, So, hall master. I would like the great river snake's inner core, sorrow-severing grass, and frost-rain sword. How many stone pillars will I need to decipher? The young man and the sixth young mistress staggered. Right after reprimanding his subordinate for spouting nonsense, he actually went ahead and asked which stone pillars he had to decipher, as though he could decipher as many stone pillars as he wanted. Do you have some compulsive disorder for boasting? Do you really think that you can decipher as many stone pillars as you want? How many stone pillars do you need to decipher? Gan Yiping's eyebrows twitched. While he was displeased by the other party's arrogant words, he replied to the query, the great river snake's inner core is worth 10 points, sorrow-severing grass 7 points, and frost-rain sword 6 points. All in all, you would need 23 points. The point awarding system is such that the first artifact identified grants you 1 point, the second artifact 2 points, the third artifact 3 points, so on and so forth. You'll have to decipher at least 7 stone pillars before you'll have enough points. 7 stone pillars? Hearing that it was exactly as Sun Chang said, Zhang Xian heaved a sigh of relief. Scratching his head, he asked, So, can I give it a try? Sure. Gan Yiping nodded. Also, there's another matter which I hope you can excuse me for. Seeing the other party answering his question so candidly, Zhang Xian felt even more embarrassed. I heard that as long as I decipher a single stone pillar, the deposit of 10 middle-tier spirit stones will be returned. In other words, the challenge will be free as long as I can decipher a single pillar. Would it be fine if I go ahead without paying the deposit? At the very most, I'll decipher more so as to make it up to you. Gan Yiping, the sixth young mistress, and the young man stared at one another and nearly spurted blood. When they heard this fellow reprimand his fat subordinate, they thought that this young fellow was at least rather humble and polite. Who knew that he would spout such arrogant words in the very next moment? Decipher more so as to make it up to him. Your head. Do you think that deciphering these stone pillars is a child's play? They thought that the fatty from a moment ago was arrogant, but his young master topped that. How conceited. A hint of wrath appeared on the sixth young mistress's face. It sounds like you're saying that you can decipher as many stone pillars as you want. I'll just try my best. Not expecting a request on his part would make the other party so angry, Zhang Xian shook his head. Fine. Since you're so confident, why don't we have a bet? Seeing how the other party still refused to take back his word despite having it so clearly pointed out to him, the sixth young mistress clenched her jaws in anger. A bet? Zhang Xian blinked his eyes in surprise. What does he challenging the stone pillars have to do with her? Why is she proposing a bet? That's right. I'll pay the 10 middle-tier spirit stone for you, and for every stone pillar you decipher, I'll pay you 100 middle-tier spirit stones. On the other hand, if you fail, I'll still be magnanimous and bear the cost for you. However, you'll have to kneel down and reflect on your arrogance. How is it, do you dare take on the bet? The sixth young mistress harumphed. Despite knowing nothing at all, how dare he speak of the challenge so lightly? Aren't you being too arrogant? If I don't teach you a lesson now, your head might become so big that you won't even remember yourself. You'll pay me 100 middle-tier spirit stones for every stone pillar I decipher? Turning around, Zhang Xian saw 2 rows consisting of a total of nearly 100 stone pillars, and his breathing hastened. Are you certain? If every single pillar was worth 100 middle-tier spirit stone and he deciphered all 100 pillars, wouldn't that add up to 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones? If he could earn that many spirit stones, he would have no worries for his future cultivation. Of course. Why? Are you intending to chicken out? If you dare not accept my bet, I advise you to act humble the next time around. The sixth young mistress waved her hands. After a moment of hesitation, Zhang Xian replied, "It's not that, I just fear that you might default on your debt." That was 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones. Zhang Xian found it hard to believe that the other party would be able to produce so many spirit stones. You. The sixth young mistress's eyes reddened in anger. She was a proud 5-star master teacher, not to mention, she had an incomparably noble identity as well. How could she possibly default on her debt? Gritting her teeth, she replied, "You need not worry. You fair, never go back on my words. Since I dared to propose this bet, naturally, I won't default on my payments. Rather, I hope that you will hold on to the end of your promise and kneel down later on. It's good that you won't default." Heaving a sigh of relief, Zhang Xian glanced at the stone pillar with shining eyes before turning to Gan Yiping and clasping his fist. "As long as I identify the artifact inside the stone pillar, it'll automatically burst apart, am I right?" "That's right." Gan Yiping nodded. "That's good." Nodding his head, Zhang Xian walked over to the first pillar. The moment he approached the pillar, he immediately understood why the young man and the sixth young mistress's faces would turn awry here. The words inscribed on the stone pillar were, by no means, a hint. Rather, it was written in an unknown language that simply baffled those looking at it. If one couldn't even understand the words inscribed, naturally, it would be impossible for one to guess the meaning behind them. Under such circumstances, it would be a wonder if one could still identify what was within the stone pillar. Seeing how that fellow dared to accept the sixth young mistress's bet, the young man sneered coldly. "He sure is an arrogant fellow." He had undergone the challenge personally, and he knew how difficult it was to identify the stone pillar. He believed that even if a 6-star appraiser were to come here, he would only end up staring blankly at the stone pillars, confused. How could a lad who wasn't even 20 yet possibly decipher them? Without a doubt, that lad would surely end up kneeling before the sixth young mistress. Just because he managed to achieve something minor at his young age, he became complacent and began boasting around. This will teach him that there's always a mountain higher than the other. The sixth young mistress also harumphed coldly. She stared at the young man intently with her eyes, and just as she was about to say something, the latter turned around with a smile. "Can I start now?" "Feel free." Lighting an incense, Gan Yiping nodded his head. "All right then." Taking a deep breath, Zhang Xian tapped the first stone pillar with his finger and said, "This is the golden heptahertz shuttle." Kacha! In an instant, the stone pillar before him was reduced into dust. Following which, a golden-colored shuttle-shaped weapon appeared before everyone's eyes. This is the purple sunset meteor hammer. This is the steel bone fist imprint. This is the connected hearts bowl. Proceeding forward, Zhang Xian would tap on each stone pillar, and those that came into contact with him shattered immediately. Rock fragments flew as if a grand parade welcoming him. Chapter 614, Taking You In as My Maid. How is this possible? The sixth young mistress and the young man stared at one another as their bodies trembled uncontrollably. They had just checked the stone pillars themselves and tried all kinds of appraising methods, but to no avail. Eventually, they even resorted to random guessing, not even that worked. They assumed that this fellow would be the same as well, but who could have thought that, without even examining the stone pillars, just by tapping on them and calling out names, the stone pillars would explode. Are you serious? Are you sure you aren't hacking? This. Gan Yiping's eyes nearly popped out from his sockets. While he didn't say anything previously, the truth was that he shared the same thoughts as the sixth young mistress and the young man. Who knew that this fellow would actually be so formidable? With just a tap, he could identify whatever that was within the stone pillars. His speed was so fast that it was astounding. How in the world did he manage to do it? 50 years of effort, and he only had 3 pillars deciphered. And yet, just within 20 breaths, the other party had already deciphered 30, no, 40, 50 pillars. He was doing it even faster than they could see the artifacts. When the butler said that his young master would be able to decipher everything, he thought that the latter was just boasting. Only at this moment did he realize that not only was the butler not boasting, he could even be said to be humble. This isn't deciphering anymore, he is sweeping through everything here. Swallowing a mouthful of saliva, Gan Yiping said, "This. Young lady, it seems like you have lost the bet." It was only with Gan Yiping's reminder did the 6th young mistress recall the bet she had made just a moment ago. Realizing the implications, her body swayed, and her vision went dark. Considering her standing, she did possess a sizable wealth. However, she only had a few hundred of them on hand. As such, anything above 1,000 would already be beyond her at the moment. Given a single stone pillar was worth 100 middle-tier spirit stones, 50 of them would spell a debt of 5,000. If she knew that he was that formidable, she would have never made the bet. Wasn't she just finding trouble for herself? With a face as bitter as a bitter gourd, the 6th young mistress was on the verge of tears. Clenching her teeth, she spoke up. "Pause for a moment, I've something to tell you." "Something to tell me?" Zhang Xian came to a stop. With a scarlet face, the 6th young mistress said, "Yes. You've already made your point, and I understand that you're a capable person. There's no need for you to continue on." It was a moment ago that she was gleefully making this bet with the other party. To renege on her promise now made her so embarrassed that she would dive deep into the ground in this very instant if she could. "You understand that I'm a capable person?" "I doubt that." "Don't worry, I'll be done soon." With a bright smile, Zhang Xian lifted up both of his hands and touched the stone pillars on both ends simultaneously and started running. Rain assembling thorn, knocking wood, 100 stem scarlet, 3-leafed golden thorn immortal. Peng 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 peng. The stone pillars on both ends exploded relentlessly, revealing an artifact one after another. 5 breaths later, Zhang Xian finally came to a stop. Clapping his hands, Zhang Xian smiled. "All right, I'm done." Walala. Before him stood 100 or so collapsed stone pillars, and the artifacts hidden within them were shining with a brilliant glow. While these artifacts were not exceptionally powerful, they were still at a decent level. They could fetch a sizable sum when sold. It has only been less than a minute. Looking at the incense not too far away, only a small portion on top was burnt. Yet, within this short period of time, that fellow actually managed to decipher every last one of the stone pillars. The surroundings turned completely silent with the exception of the clattering of teeth. They had seen plenty of formidable people throughout their life, but this. That. "Hall master, after deciphering so many stone pillars, I should be able to take those 3 items, right?" Zhang Xian walked up to the old man and asked. "Air." With a twitching mouth, Gan Yiping quickly turned to look at the attendant beside him and clenched his jaws. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and wrap everything in the shop up for this young master over here. From today onward, he is the new owner of the mystical treasure hall." "Yes." The attendant quickly rushed down the stairs. "Hall master." Zhang Xian was taken aback. "Yes. Going by the cumulative score system, the points you've accrued through breaking all 110 stone pillars adds up to more than 6,000. Gan Yiping nodded. Honestly, with 6,000 points, even if you were to put all of the treasures in his mystical treasure hall together, it wouldn't be sufficient to compensate the other party. It would be a huge stroke of fortune if someone could decipher even one of these pillars, and this fellow actually managed to decipher 110 of them in a single breath. He felt as though everything he had known was being flipped upside down, and this left him terribly frenzied. But after his frenzy came excitement. While he did lose his entire wealth in a breath, the doubt that had been lingering in his heart for several decades had finally been resolved. He felt as though he would be content even if he were to die at this very instant. Thank you. Clasping his fist, he bowed deeply. 50 years. It had been an entire 50 years. Ever since he obtained these stone pillars, he had been devoting his entire life to breaking them. He thought that he would end up carrying these doubts and regrets into his grave, but who knew that this young man would actually resolve what would have been his greatest regret in less than a minute. With the secrets of these stone pillars unraveled, he would have no regret even if he were to die at this very instant. Young master, is the new owner of the mystical treasure hall. Despite having all of his wealth taken away, the hall master still thanked teacher. The dumbfounded Sun Chang and Yuan Tao stared at one another blankly. They came here to buy a couple of items, and yet, they ended up swiping everything within the mystical treasure hall clean. Not only so, the hall master even thanks them for that. As expected of their young master and teacher, he truly couldn't be comprehended through common logic. Didn't you say that you would pay me 100 middle-tier spirit stones for each stone pillar I decipher? I've deciphered more than 100 of them, but I'll give you a discount, 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones. After trading some pleasantries with Hall Master Gon, Zhang Xian turned to look at the sixth young mistress. Rather than the artifacts in the mystical treasure hall, he was more interested in the spirit stones. With a face flushed red, the sixth young mistress's body trembled. She had thought that the other party would have been unable to even resolve a single one of the pillars, and she could have the other party kneeling before her to teach him a lesson. How could she have ever known that? Not only did the other party decipher every last one of the stone pillars in the store, he even became the new owner of the mystical treasure hall. What in the world was this? If only she'd known the other party was so formidable, she would have never gotten ahead of herself. 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones. Even if she were to take out everything in her possession, she still wouldn't have that much. Why? Do you intend to go back on your words? Noticing the other party's silence and pale face, Zhang Xian frowned. If not for the other party insistently interfering in his affairs, going to the extent of even making this bet, he wouldn't have bothered with her. Since she had tried to make him kneel through the bet, she should suffer the consequences of her own actions as well. I'll help the sixth young mistress pay for her debt. Seeing that the woman he was courting being forced to a corner, the young man stepped forward with gritted teeth. Honestly speaking, he couldn't afford 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones either. But at this point, it mattered not anymore. If he could win the other party's heart by standing up during her times of crisis, it would be worth it no matter how heavy a price he had to pay. Of course, he had thought of refuting the bet. But the conditions were stated clearly, and if it was known that respected 5-star master teachers like them actually went back on their words, how could they face others in the future? If the headquarters were to learn of this matter, they might even face punishment. Only one who holds oneself with dignity would be qualified to teach others. If one couldn't even uphold the end of one's promise, who would dare to allow one to be a teacher? I don't need your help. Before the young man could finish his words, the sixth young mistress gritted her teeth and said, I'll repay it myself. After which, she lifted her gaze and looked at Zhang Xian. I'll repay all 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones to you. However, I don't have that much money on me at the moment, so you'll have to give me a few months' time. She couldn't even take out 1,000 spirit stones at the moment, needless to say 10,000. However, while 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones was a huge sum, her family was more than capable of repaying it. A few months? Zhang Xian shook his head. If it's in a few months' time, I'd surely be able to take out 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones easily. By then, your debt would mean nothing to me. Huanyu Empire was just a small stop for him before heading to Hongyuan Empire. He wouldn't even remain here for half a month, let alone a few months. Besides, it had only been half a year since he started cultivating, and who knows how far he would reach in a few months' time. By then, chances were that he wouldn't even need middle-tier spirit stones anymore. Along with the rays of his cultivation, his heaven's path Shinchi was becoming purer and purer. The requirement demanded of the spiritual energy he absorbed was increasing swiftly as well. Even though he was only at Transcendent Mortal 4 Dan Pinnacle at the moment, he had already realized that the middle-tier spirit stones were gradually losing their effectiveness. It wouldn't be long before it would become completely ineffective, just like how low-tier spirit stones were to him. If it's going to be useless to me in a few months' time, what is the point of you returning me the debt then? Then how do you intend to resolve this matter? The sixth young mistress gritted her teeth. This. Zhang Xian frowned. The other party had made this bet confidently a moment ago, saying that she would definitely be able to repay the debt. Who could have known she would be so poor? If he had known beforehand, he would have never made this bet with her and bring himself so much trouble. Didn't you say that you would make me kneel if I lost just now? After hesitating for a moment, Zhang Xian replied, all right, I won't make you kneel, but I'm lacking a maid to serve me tea at the moment. I'll put you under Sun Chang's command, and as long as you do well, we can forget about the 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones. Even if the other party couldn't fork out the money, he couldn't let this matter go just like that. The other party had spoken so arrogantly a moment ago, trying to teach him a lesson. Since that was the case, he would return it to her. Besides, considering how the other party had achieved a cultivation of Transcendent Mortal 6 Dan despite her young age, she must be of considerable standing. With such a subordinate, he would be able to solve many of his problems. Before the young lady could speak, the young man beside her leaped in shock and exclaimed, Maid? You want to take sixth young mistress in as your servant? Do you know who she is? Sun Chang interrupted the other party's word. Who she is? No matter how incredible she is, can she be more incredible than our young master? It's your fortune that our young master is accepting you in as his maid. If you are unwilling to accept, why don't you try repaying your debt first? Young master is old master's direct disciple, and his standing could be said to be even above Pavilion Master Mo. You should feel honored that he's accepting you as his maid. To think that you still dare to talk about identity. Know your place. I shall have you know that the sixth young mistress is the PRI. Hearing the fatty's words, the young man harumphed, but before he could finish his words, the sixth young mistress interrupted him. Enough. Gritting her teeth, the sixth young mistress turned to look at Zhang Xian proudly and said, It's impossible for me to become your maid, and 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones aren't enough for that either. Change your terms. You aren't willing. Kowtow then. Zhang Xian replied impassively. Chapter 615, Princess Fair, You. The sixth young mistress clenched her fists so tightly that her nails sunk deep into her flesh. Her face was dark, and her eyes were clouded with intense resentment. If she could, she would have dashed forward to slice this man into countless pieces. She would never accept being a maid, and kneeling was a humiliation so great that she would rather die. Clenching her jaws so tightly that her teeth might chip from the sheer force, the sixth young mistress held back her wrath and spoke once more. Choose something else. Hearing the other party's complaints, Sun Chang interjected with a look of displeasure. Our young master has given you a lot of options already. To turn down everything, are you trying to be difficult? Since you refuse to kneel and won't become a maid, our young master still needs someone to warm his bed for him. Do you want to take on that job? As long as you please our young master, 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones are nothing. What the heck is this? You should be thankful that young master's temper is good. If it were me, I would have never given you any other alternative. What did you say? The sixth young mistress's eyes immediately turned red, and her hands trembled in rage. Which part of what I said do you not understand? Sun Chang shook his head. Turning to Zhang Xian, he said, Young master, since this fellow is being difficult, can you allow me to deal with her? She's your underling, feel free. Zhang Xian shrugged nonchalantly. Even though Sun Chang might get reckless at times, he did possess wits when it came to dealing with others. He must have an idea in mind. His underling. Hearing those words, the sixth young mistress nearly puked blood. She thought that the reason why this young man wanted to accept her as his maid was because he felt lust for her, considering her beautiful appearance. Who could have thought that she couldn't be any more wrong? He actually wanted her to come under this shady-looking person of a butler. Besides, what is with your nonchalance? Do you know who I am? Even the emperor of Huanyu Empire would have to welcome me with the grandest of ceremonies. If I were to tell you, you would surely faint from shock. To actually be subjected to such conditions. What a tremendous humiliation. Thank you, young master. Turning to the sixth young mistress, Sun Chang measured her from head to toe and frowned. Your appearance is subpar, so I doubt our young master would want you to warm his bed. You should just serve him as an ordinary maid. Subpar? Would not want me? Blood gushed into the head of the sixth young mistress, and she nearly exploded. You actually dare to evaluate an appearance such as mine, subpar? Are you saying that intentionally to anger me? Little did she know that Sun Chang actually meant what he said. The young master's students, Zhao Ye and Wang Ying, had appearances that didn't pale to her at all. Even Mou and Zhao Feiwu possessed superior grace as well. But even so, young master still remained unmoved. Considering that, how could he possibly be interested in such an obstinate and domineering lass? Considering that you're doing this to repay your loan, we should talk about the duration too. Let's make it 5 months. Since you owe young master 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones, over a course of 5 months, that would be equivalent to a wage of around 66 middle-tier spirit stones each day. I'll round that up to a 70. Counting with his fingers, Sun Chang said, but of course, if you feel indignant having to serve as a maid, you can purchase days off by repaying your debt. On those days, you'll be able to do whatever you want to do. 70 middle-tier spirit stones a day. Purchase days off. The sixth young mistress was taken aback. That's right. On the days that you're off, you won't be considered a maid. In other words, you are paying the 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones over a course of 5 months. Any time within the 5 months, if you find sufficient money to repay your debt, you can back out of your responsibilities. As for why it's 70 spirit stones a day instead of 66, considering that we're going by a daily basis, naturally, it should be more expensive. If you wish to go by month, I could lower the charge. Sun Chang replied. Daily basis, Pu. Initially, the sixth young mistress still found the idea acceptable, but upon hearing this part, she nearly fainted. What does it sound as though she's some kind of commercial good for sales? Paying by daily and monthly basis. The more she thought about it, the more frenzied she felt. She was on the verge of explosion. However, after her anger subsided, she gave it some thought, and honestly speaking, she did find this solution acceptable to her. She would never be willing to lower herself to serving as a maid for 5 months, but if they were going by a daily basis, as long as she could get past the first few days, her family should be able to send some spirit stones over to free her from her suffering. All right, I'll agree to it. Having thought things through, the sixth young mistress nodded her head, giving her consent. Good. Zhang Xian's eyes couldn't help but light up upon hearing Sun Chang's arrangements. As expected of a merchant, his means were indeed extraordinary. It would be difficult for anyone to take out 10,000 spirit stones in a breath, but if they were to split it over a longer duration, the repayment would seem much more reasonable. The concept of interest payment wasn't widely used in this world, but as an astute businessman, he knew how to use his words to shape the conditions into something the other party could accept. Not to mention, he even managed to hike up the price at that. Sixth young mistress. Not expecting that she would agree to such terms, the young man accompanying her panicked. Others might be unaware of the sixth young mistress's identity, but he knew it very well. For a person of her standing to serve as a maid. You must be jesting. If news were to spread, the royalty of Huanyu Empire would probably go insane. The sixth young mistress harumphed. I'll deal with my own affairs. But. Veins were popping from the young man's temples. Interrupting the conversation between the duo, Sun Chang said, enough. If the both of you have anything to say, put it off for now. From this moment onward, you're our young master's maid. If you don't have money to repay your loan, prepare whatever you need and follow us back to the residence. There's no need for that. I'll pay for 10 days first. Harumphing coldly, the sixth young mistress flicked her hands, and a pile of middle-tier spirit stones appeared before the eyes of the crowd. Counting it quickly, there were exactly 700 of them there. Sun Chang's eyes lit up. He turned to look at Zhang Xian, and the latter said, you should take them for now. Yes. Sun Chang quickly put the spirit stones into his storage ring before turning to look at the young lady once more. You seem to be from a prestigious family, so I doubt that you will do anything as foolish as running away. But even so, we still need a guarantee. Thus, you'll need to leave something valuable with us, and after the 5 months are up or when you've repaid your entire debt, we'll return the item to you. You. The sixth young mistress's eyebrows twitched violently. It was already sufficiently humiliating for her to have to agree to serve as a maid, and yet, the other party was even worried that she would escape. How infuriating. But she knew that these two were fearless thugs, and arguing with them would only shorten her own lifespan. Thus, she flicked her wrist and took out an emblem. 5 bright stars shone brightly on them. Her 5-star master teacher emblem. This emblem represents my identity. Surely it should suffice as a pawn for my debt. It will do. Sun Chang took it and placed it in his storage ring. He was surprised to learn that this young lady was a 5-star master teacher as well, just like the young man. But in his view, 5-star master teachers were nothing to fear as well. As the butler of an 8-star master teacher, if he couldn't even face a 5-star master teacher with nonchalance, he should have quit his job ages ago. Humph. Seeing how that fellow took her emblem without the slightest fear or astonishment, the sixth young mistress froze for a moment. An awful complexion slowly spread across her face before she turned around and stomped out of the store. She couldn't stay here even a moment longer. It was no longer about her loss in the bet but that, she couldn't stand facing these two anymore. What the heck was with them? She thought that a young 5-star master teacher like her would be respected and feared no matter where she went, but, the other party looked as though they didn't even give a damn. It was as if her identity was nothing more than a wisp of wind to them. An intense feeling of indignation left her so frustrated that she could spew a bucket of blood. Sixth young mistress. Seeing his companion leave, the young man froze for a moment. Then, turning to Zhang Xian and Sun Chang, he threatened menacingly, the both of you, just you wait. Leaving behind those words, he hurried down to catch up with sixth young mistress. Sixth princess, those two fellows sure know their place. Why don't I get Yi Qian to have them beheaded? A glint flashed across the young man's eyes as he harumphed. This time, he addressed the young lady before him not as sixth young mistress but as sixth princess. If Crown Prince Yi Qian of Huanyu Empire was here, he would have surely recognized the sixth young mistress as Hongyuan Empire's Princess Fei Er. And the young man beside her would be her fellow classmate, 5-star master teacher Xing Yuan. The both of them were strolling around when they caught sight of Mystical Treasure Hall. Curious, the both of them walked in. Little did they know that they were just moments away from suffering both financially and mentally. Noble from birth, she was a great princess whom even the emperor of Huanyu Empire would have to regard with utmost respect. To think that she would actually end up as a maid. This was a huge humiliation. As an esteemed princess, a 5-star master teacher, should I kill someone just because I lost a bet? Princess Fei Er abruptly came to a halt, and her eyebrows shot up. This. Xing Yuan's face reddened. Losing was embarrassing in itself. If she were to kill someone due to that, even if no one would ever learn of it, she would never be able to come to terms with it. But even so, we can't let this thing go. That person is simply too arrogant and infuriating. Xing Yuan gritted his teeth. He's indeed infuriating, but admittedly, he does possess incredible capability. Against the stone pillars which even you and I are unable to decipher, he actually deciphered 110 of them in less than a minute. Furthermore, did you see the nonchalance on his butler's face when he saw my 5-star master teacher emblem? The both of them are unlikely to be ordinary. Tell Yi Qian to look into their identity. Princess Fei gestured. She didn't agree to the arrangement out of recklessness. Having reached 5-star, her soul depth had already exceeded 15. 0, allowing her to separate her emotions from rational thinking. The master and butler pair might not anything special in terms of their cultivation, but their calm disposition that couldn't be fazed by anything wasn't normal. Most likely, there was something deeper to them. Besides, she was also curious to know how the other party deciphered those stone pillars so easily. All right. Xing Yuan nodded. Gongzi, may I know how to address you? After watching the 6th princess and Xing Yuan leave, Gan Yiping swiftly regained his composure, and walking up to Zhang Xian, he clasped his fist and bowed. You can call me Zhang Xian. Zhang Xian nodded. So, it's Zhang Gongzi. Here are all of the artifacts our mystical treasure hall possesses. You've accrued more than sufficient points from deciphering the stone pillars, so these are all yours. The attendant had already packed everything neatly into a storage ring and passed it over. Grabbing the storage ring, Zhang Xian took a look into it and saw several shelves of precious artifacts inside. But if you were to give all of these to me, what will happen to your mystical treasure hall? Zhang Xian asked with a slightly embarrassed look. To tell the truth, he had little interest in these artifacts. However, rules were rules, and it would be impolite for him to refuse it. Thus, he was put in a difficult position. If he were to accept it all, wouldn't the business of the mystical treasure hall collapse instantly? The reason why I built the mystical treasure hall was to have these stone pillars deciphered. Since I've received the answers I sought, I can die without any regrets now. It's time for me to return to my hometown and live my final years in peace. Gan Yiping chuckled. His face had a serenity like never before. Attracted to the mystery of the unknown, he had spent 50 years on these stone pillars, attempting to decipher them. When everything was done, he felt as though a burden weighing heavily on his shoulders had disappeared, and he suddenly felt much lighter. A look of admiration reflected in Zhang Xian's eyes as he nodded. It seemed like this person had thought everything through now that his limit was approaching. Indeed. Since his greatest wish had been fulfilled, there was indeed nothing left for him to regret. These artifacts might be valuable, but none of them could be taken to the afterlife. Just as empty-handed as one came, empty-handed will be how one departs. Knowing that the other party sincerely wished to give these artifacts to him, Zhang Xian accepted them politely. In exchange, he offered the other party several pointers on his cultivation. After hearing Zhang Xian's pointers, Gan Yiping thanked him profusely in excitement. After chatting for a moment longer, Zhang Xian left with Yuan Tao and Sun Chang. After leaving the mystical treasure hall, Sun Chang asked, "Young master, where are we going now?" On top of the inner core of a great river snake and the sorrow-severing grass, we still need more medicinal herbs to mediate the properties before brewing a medicinal solution. Zhang Xian pondered for a moment before adding, "We'll head to the apothecary guild. Over there, we'll be able to engage the help of an apothecary too." Even though he was an official 3-star apothecary, he only received his rank through the means of pill debate. It would be best for him to leave the job of pill forging to another. Yes. The duo nodded. The apothecary guild was quite a far distance away. The trio searched for a carriage, and after around an hour-long journey, they finally arrived at their destination. The building of the Huanyu Empire Apothecary Guild was tall and vast. In front of the main entrance was a stone sculpture of a cauldron 12 meters tall, granting a solemn and grand atmosphere to the Apothecary Guild. Stepping in, a whiff of fragrant medicinal herbs and spiritual energy gushing through the pores of their bodies left them revitalized. Taking a slight sniff, Zhang Xian remarked with a smile, "This is pill fragrance. It seems like someone has forged grade 5 pills here, and on a frequent basis at that." Upon the successful forging of a grade 5 pill, a deep pill fragrance could be produced by chance. Those who smelled it would immediately find themselves re-energized. Only a place where pills of such grade had been frequently successfully forged could such a deep scent be produced. Since there are 5-star apothecaries here, it isn't too surprising for there to be grade 5 pills as well. Sun Chang nodded. The most capable apothecary of Huanyu Empire had reached the level of 5-star pinnacle. Let's inquire at the front reception to see if we can get a 5-star apothecary. Zhang Xian nodded. The inner core of a great river snake and sorrow-severing grass were extremely valuable, and he only had a set of them. No mistakes could be tolerated. Also, even though it was just a medicinal fluid, its concoction consisted of complex processes that demanded the hands of a 5-star apothecary. Otherwise, there was a high chance it would end in failure. "Gongzi, may I know what you need?" At the front reception desk stood an 18 or 19-year-old lady. She greeted Zhang Xian with a bright smile. "I need to concoct a unique medicinal solution. May I ask if there's any 5-star apothecaries here that I can engage the help of and what price it would be?" Zhang Xian asked. Since one could buy tutelage jade tokens at the Master Teacher Pavilion, naturally, one could also engage the services of an apothecary at an apothecary guild too. The price of engaging the service of an apothecary tended to be much lower than purchasing the completed product, but one would have to gather the ingredients himself. The services of a 5-star apothecary? The lady receptionist was taken aback. "Why? It can't be done." Seeing the other party's reaction, Zhang Xian frowned. It would be troublesome if he couldn't do so. Given that the great river snake had reached a cultivation realm of transcendent mortal 7 Dan before its death, its inner core was likely to possess immense power, and a 4-star apothecary couldn't hope to suppress its rampaging energies during the concoction. On the other hand, the minimum requirement to becoming a 5-star apothecary was to achieve a cultivation of transcendent mortal 6 Dan Cosmos Bridge realm, so it shouldn't pose much of a problem. After a moment of hesitation, the receptionist replied, "We do provide such services, just that, a formidable 5-star apothecary from the headquarters has come by today to conduct a lecture, and all of the 5-star apothecaries in the guild have gone over to listen to it. In fact, even 4-star and 3-star apothecaries are all there as well. So, for the time being, we don't have anyone available. If it's possible, may I ask you to return tomorrow?" "Tomorrow?" Zhang Xian frowned. They would be deciding on the final distribution of slots for the cleansing lake tonight, and it shouldn't be long before they go in. It was unlikely that Zhang Xian would have much time left. After a moment of hesitation, Zhang Xian said, "I can't wait that long. When does the lecture end?" "Can you help me ask around to see if any 5-star apothecary is willing to take on my job?" "Ask around?" The receptionist's face darkened. "I am just a receptionist. 5-star apothecaries are too noble for me to approach." As a receptionist in charge of the front desk, she was only an apprentice. Putting aside 5-star apothecaries, it would be difficult for her to even come into contact with 3-star apothecaries. There was simply too huge a disparity in their ranks. Besides, there will surely be a bout of discussion after the lecture to exchange experiences and learn from one another. Everyone will likely be busy for the entire day, so I doubt that you'll be able to engage their service no matter how much you pay. This was a precious opportunity to learn. They would never miss this chance just for a small sum of money. While the apothecary from the headquarters was of equivalent rank to them, he was likely to possess more advanced techniques to pill forging and controlling the cauldron. This, in itself, was more than worthy of their attention and research. This. Zhang Xian's eyebrows shot up. This was indeed a good learning opportunity for the apothecaries, so it was unlikely that anyone would pass on it for his job. But on the other hand, it was impossible for Zhang Xian to do it himself. Putting aside whether it was too late for him to learn pill forging now, even if he could master it swiftly, his cultivation was only at clarifying turbidity realm pinnacle, so it would be impossible for him to suppress a rebound from the great river snake's inner core. So, what should he do now? After a moment of contemplation, Zhang Xian asked, "Since that's the case, can you bring me over to where the lecture is held?" It would be impossible to get the concoction of the medicinal solution done if he were to wait for the entire session to end. Since that was the case, he decided to enter the lecture hall and ask them personally. After all, as fellow apothecaries, it should be easier for him to ask for their favor. "Bring you over?" The lady frowned. "That's a place where only apothecaries can enter." "Oh, I'm an apothecary too. It's just that I haven't taken a promotion exam in recent time." Flicking his wrist, Zhang Xian took out his apothecary emblem. His current rank was still 3-star, obtained back when he was in Tianwu Kingdom. But even so, it was sufficient for him to attend the lecture as well. Upon seeing the emblem, the receptionist immediately bowed deeply and said, "Master Apothecary, this way please." While a 3-star apothecary might not rank at the top of the pyramid in Huanyu Empire, he was still not a person that a little receptionist like her could offend. Nodding his head, Zhang Xian proceeded along with Sun Chang and Yuan Tao. The apothecary guild was rather large. They had to walk a long distance before arriving at a huge hall. Coming to a stop before the door, the lady apologized. "I apologize, but only official apothecaries can enter, so I can only bring you this far." "It's fine." Zhang Xian smiled. Pinning his emblem on his chest, Zhang Xian turned to Sun Chang and Yuan Tao, and instructed, "The both of you should wait here. I'll go in and take a look." After which, he pushed open the door and walked in. As the both of them weren't apothecaries either, they couldn't enter too. There was a guard standing on the other side, but seeing Zhang Xian's emblem, they didn't stop him. This hall was several hundred square meters huge, and a huge crowd was seated in here. Every single one of them was dressed in an apothecary's robe. In a sense, it was similar to the selection round with Ruohuan Gongzi and the others back at the Myriad Kingdom City. Lifting his gaze to the stage, he saw a person standing before a cauldron, forging a pill while deciphering the process step by step. Flames blazed as a pair of fair hands steadily added herb after herb into the cauldron. "It's a young lady." Zhang Xian was astonished. He thought that a lecturer from the headquarters would be an elder in his 70s or 80s. To think that it would be a young lady in her 20s instead. Female apothecaries were rare, and considering how she was qualified to conduct a lesson to even 5-star apothecaries, she was likely to a rather capable one at that. Thus, his interest was piqued. The other party was dressed in a loose purple robe, and her long, black hair was coiled on top of her head. Her eyes sparkled like the stars, reflecting wisdom. However, her face was as cold as the middle of winter, and not the slightest emotion could be seen on it. Surprisingly, her appearance was on par with the 6th young mistress from before. In fact, the slight curvature that could be seen under her loose robe accentuated to her beauty. An emblem with 5 stars was pinned on her chest, indicating her identity as a 5-star apothecary. Pill forging requires one to be accompanied with flames for a long period of time, and it can be considered to be one of the tougher occupations. To think that she would actually reach 5-star at such a young age, incredible. Zhang Xian was impressed. Most of the high-ranked apothecaries were all males. It wasn't that females couldn't make it, but the intense heat from the cauldron was usually a huge deterrent factor. On top of that, there were plenty of rare medicinal herbs required for pill forging that grew on top of treacherous terrains, making the occupation a dangerous one as well. As such, most ladies choose not to take on this occupation. On the other hand, the lady before him actually reached a rank of 5-star at such a young age. Her forging technique was profound, and her movements were fluid. It showed that she had devoted a lot of effort into her pill forging usually. Otherwise, regardless of her talent, she couldn't possibly possess such level of skill. Regardless of what occupation one was in, talent was only one of the many factors to one's success. In comparison, hard work played a much greater role. Standing not too far away from the young lady was an elder, who was stroking his long, white beard in commendation. He must be the guild leader here, Zhang Xian deduced. This elder carried an authoritative demeanor, and his cultivation felt deep like an abyss, revealing that he was likely in a position of power. On top of that, he seemed to be standing behind the young lady to take care of her, interjecting now and then to add on to the young lady's points. Even if he wasn't the guild leader, he was probably an influential figure here. After looking around, Zhang Xian found an empty seat and sat down. At that moment, the young lady's voice sounded. Her voice was crisp, similar to a jade and a stone knocking on one another, and listening to it, in itself, was a pleasure. However, her tone carried a cold edge that distanced her from others. Emerald jade grass has a cold attribute, and if you were to put it into the cauldron directly, it might cause a conflict with the wooden cypress flower placed in previously. Thus, it has to be soaked in hamachi extract for 2 hours before it can be used. This can accentuate its medicinal properties while lowering the temperature in the cauldron, thus enhancing the quality of the pills forged. As for the wood incense flower, it has to be soaked in violet flora water and basked under the hot sun for 5 days to maximize its medicinal properties. Otherwise, considering how it is added at the very middle of the forging process when the cauldron is at its warmest, it is highly likely that it would be burned to crisp. The lady explained the forging process and the preparation of the ingredients one by one. Her words were backed by logical explanations, leaving the listening crowd nodding their heads ceaselessly as though drunk. Impartation of heaven's will. Could she be a master teacher as well? Seeing the expressions on everyone's face, and noting the unique intonation to the voice, Zhang Xian shook his head with a slight smile. Even though the young lady on the stage was lecturing on the art of pill forging, she had infused impartation of heaven's will into her lecture to facilitate the learning process. Only master teachers were capable of doing so. From the looks of it, on top of being an apothecary, the young lady before him was also a master teacher. It was just moments ago that he met 2 5-star master teacher in his 20s, and right now, he was meeting yet another one. As expected of Huanyu Empire, it was indeed overflowing with talents. If they had been within the 28 regional powers as well, Zhang Xian would surely have been in 4th place in the master teacher tournament. It was not that he was less knowledgeable than a 5-star master teacher, but his cultivation was simply too lacking. He stood no chance against them in a direct battle. Since she's a master teacher, it should be easier for me to communicate with her. I should try to engage her help later on. Since the other party was a master teacher on top of being a 5-star apothecary, it should be easier for Zhang Xian to engage her help. The core ingredient of the medicinal solution was the inner core of a transcendent mortal 7-dan Great River Snake. To maximize its effectiveness, Zhang Xian's guidance would play a crucial part. However, an ordinary 5-star apothecary wouldn't possibly listen to the words of a 3-star apothecary. On the other hand, since the young lady was a master teacher as well, it should be easier to Zhang Xian to win her trust. I thank everyone here for your cooperation. This is my comprehension of the grade 5 spirit revitalization pill. Just as Zhang Xian was pondering over how he should negotiate with the other party to have her concoct the medicinal solution for him, Jia, the cauldron on the stage was opened, and a dense aroma immediately gushed into the room. Raising his gaze, he saw round, smooth pills emerging from the cauldron. A grade 5 pill at perfection. As a grade 5 pinnacle pill, the Spirit Revitalization pill has always been one of the hardest pills to forge for a 5-star apothecary. Even if the guild leader were to forge it personally, probably only 2 in 10 cauldrons of pills would reach the level of perfection. Yet, she actually managed to achieve such a rank on her first try. Incredible, as expected of an apothecary from the headquarters. On top of that, you might be unaware, but on top of being an apothecary, she's also a master teacher. This is the reason why her explanations are so clear. If I were to study based on the content of this lecture, would surely make huge progress in my research. Indeed. I've also benefited greatly from this lecture. As expected of an apothecary from Hongyuan Empire. Regardless of whether it's the pill forging or the preparation of ingredients, her understanding of those is far deeper and more accurate than ours. Of course. The Apothecary School of Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy has a much more complete heritage of pill forging than our branch. Upon seeing the pill emerging from the cauldron, a huge commotion broke out amongst the crowd. The skill of an apothecary is determined by the quality of the pill he could forge. Even a pill forged through the same pill formula can have differing quality, ranked by formation, satiation, perfection, and inscribed pill. Reaching formation in a higher grade would qualify one for a promotion. On the other hand, if one could reach satiation in the forging of a pill with a grade corresponding to one's current rank, one could be considered to be above most of one's peers already. Achieving perfection wasn't easy at all. Even a skilled apothecary might not produce a single cauldron of perfection pills amidst 10. And yet, this young lady in her 20s, despite explaining the process to everyone while forging the pills, was actually still able to reach this tier. Her mastery in pill forging had reached an astounding level. Let's begin the discussion now. If you've any suggestions, feel free to raise them so that I can learn from it too. Putting the pill down, the lady on the stage glanced at the crowd. Apothecary Luo, I have a question. The Spirit Revitalization pill has the effect of nourishing one's soul as well, but to achieve this end, one has to fuse a part of his soul energy into the pill in the midst of the forging process. I've tried to do so, but I always end up being burnt by the flames. May I know if there's any solution to that problem? Asked a 5-star apothecary on the front row. Since it was a discussion, naturally, they could raise any questions they had. Considering the searing heat in the cauldron and the cold nature of one's soul, it's natural that one's soul would be burned if one carelessly attempts to infuse one's soul into the pill in the midst of the forging process. But in the first place, there's no need for us to do so. Amidst the ingredients for the Spirit Revitalization pill, there's a glacé heart grass which, being a spirit herb, possesses spirit. The young lady on the stage, Apothecary Luo, explained, as long as one harnesses the spirit contained within the medicinal herb properly before the forging process, it can grant the equivalent effect as well. I see. The 5-star apothecary came to a realization and nodded his head in gratitude. I have a problem too. Following which, another 5-star apothecary stood up. Before long, 7 5-star apothecaries had already posed their question, but the young apothecary Luo didn't show the slightest hint of panic at all. She answered their questions calmly with rational arguments backed by logic, impressing the entire crowd. Does anyone have any other questions? The reason why I came here was to trade some feedback with everyone. If you've any opinions or advice, feel free to raise them. After answering several questions, Apothecary Luo glanced at the crowd. Her study of pill forging had met a wall recently, and her apothecary teacher had told her that she had to interact more with other apothecaries to share ideas to further her own path. That was the main reason why she came to the Apothecary Guild. And honestly speaking, this was working out well as well. Before she started forging the Spirit Revitalization pill, some of her concepts were still not clearly fleshed out, and there were some parts she was unsure of. However, as she explained it, she found her own understanding of pill forging deepening as well. However, this wasn't sufficient. She wanted to hear an alternative opinion to her own to improve. Apothecary Luo must be jesting. Your understanding of the subject is deep, and your skills are exquisite. There's no advice we can possibly offer you. Indeed. Your movements are perfect, and not to mention, you even achieved perfection in your forging of the spirit revitalization pill. Even if we wanted to criticize your work, there's nothing we can raise. Your understanding of pill forging is far deeper than ours. If not for your lacking cultivation, you could have been promoted to a 6-star apothecary by now. We really dare not offer any advice to you. Everyone shook their heads. The person before them had come from Hengyuan Empire, and on top of being a 5-star apothecary, she was a master teacher as well. She was even qualified to be their teacher, so how could they possibly raise any objections against her? Even if they had any, they wouldn't dare to speak up. Sigh. Seeing everyone shake their heads, Apothecary Luo sighed deeply. In Hengyuan Empire, no one dared to criticize her in fear of her identity. She thought that since no one knew of her here, she would be able to garner some feedback. Yet, her hopes fell flat in the end. Do you really wish to hear my opinion? Just as she was feeling disappointed within, an indifferent voice sounded from the crowd. Yes. Apothecary Luo quickly nodded her head. All right then. Here is my opinion. After wasting so much time and effort, can this even be called pill forging? Chapter 617, First Flaw, What? He said that Apothecary Luo's actions cannot be considered pill forging. This is way too much. Apothecary Luo is a 5-star apothecary from the headquarters. Everyone here can see that her forging technique and movements were flawless, and yet, someone actually dares to insult her pill forging? Who is that insolent fellow? Audacious. It was as if someone had set gasoline on fire. Wrathful eyes immediately turned in the direction from where the voice came from. And following which, they saw a young man in his 20s wearing a 3-star apothecary emblem on his chest. A mere 3-star apothecary actually dares to utter such nonsense? Ignorant brat. Upon seeing the other party's appearance, many among the crowd sneered, and some even bellowed angrily. Apothecary Luo might be young, but her understanding of pills and pill forging technique were above most of them here. Her succinct and precise movements in her pill forging were a pleasure to the eyes. If a pill forging of such level couldn't even be considered as pill forging, what else could? Besides, even if someone wanted to criticize her, one should at least be a 5-star apothecary. Can a 3-star apothecary like you even understand what has just happened? How dare you speak such arrogant words? Apothecary Luo also frowned. What she wanted to hear was a feedback, not an insult. The apothecary over there, may I know what mistakes there are in my pill forging for you to utter such words? You want to know? The young man raised his eyelids. Of course. Apothecary Luo replied. There were a total of 127 mistakes in your pill forging just now. I fear that if I were to say them all, your confidence might be shattered, and you would find yourself unable to forge any pill from now on, the young man said impassively. 127 mistakes. Harumphing coldly, Apothecary Luo flung her sleeves and said, if you can really list out that many, even if I were to have my confidence shattered, it will be only due to my lack of expertise. Initially, she thought that the other party might have noticed some major flaws in her pill forging. But upon hearing such words, she immediately denied that possibility. Her pill forging technique had been refined by the countless predecessors of Hengyuan Master Teacher Academy, forming a nearly perfect art. If there was a mistake or two, she would still be able to acknowledge it. But more than 100. You must be pulling my leg. With so many mistakes, putting aside whether it is possible to form a pill, it is more likely that the cauldron would explode even before the fire is lit. Even if one wanted to boast, there should be a limit. Beyond that, one would just be a shameless fool. Are you certain that you want to listen to them? A slight smile crept onto the young man's face. That's right. Apothecary Luo replied. Sigh. Since you wish to know, if I were to continue remaining silent, you all would only think that I'm doing this intentionally to cause trouble. Shaking his head, the young man stood up and walked onto the stage. He first placed his hand on the cauldron beside the young lady before walking around it. After which, he turned to her and said, "Before that, I would like to ask you if you know of the background of this cauldron." Knowing the background of one's cauldron is the very basics of an apothecary. Of course, I at least know of the background of my own cauldron. Apothecary Luo knitted her eyebrows slightly in displeasure. This cauldron was crafted by 5-star blacksmith Wu Feng, and it took him a total of 12 years to finish its crafting. It's made by an alloy of the frigid metal found at the bottom of an ocean and blue copper silver, thus making it resistant to high heat and extreme cold. It is a spirit intermediate tier pinnacle artifact. Hearing the young lady's flawless explanation, the young man continued, "Correct. But do you know that this cauldron has once suffered an explosion?" Naturally, that young man was Zhang Xian. To convince the other party to willingly obey his instructions in the forging of the medicinal solution, he would have to impress her first to establish his credibility. He was contemplating how he could do so when the other party expressed that she was seeking the opinions or advice of others. Since that was the case, there was no reason for him not to grasp this opportunity. While Zhang Xian's understanding of pill forging hadn't reached 5-star yet, he was still able to see through the other party's flaws through the Library of Heaven's path. Apothecary Luo froze for a moment before replying. "I do. It has suffered an explosion before, but the ingredients only ended up being charred black. The cauldron suffered no damage from the incident, and there are no cracks either. As such, it shouldn't affect any subsequent pill forging. This cauldron was given to her by an elder of her family, and she had used it for 3 whole years. It did suffer from an explosion once, but she should be the only one aware of it. How did the other party learn of it?" "You're right that the cauldron didn't suffer any damage." Zhang Xian touched the surface of the cauldron with his finger. There are indeed no cracks. But based on the slightly gray tint on the opening of the cauldron and the slight scent of metallic rust, if I'm not mistaken, you were forging, searing flame pill, a grade 5 pill. Indeed. Apothecary Luo's frown deepened as she nodded her head. The previous explosion indeed happened in the midst of the forging of a searing flame pill. Even though she wasn't the one forging it, she was present then and knew of the condition. But to be able to know what was being forged during the explosion just by looking at the color of the cauldron and the scent of it, this young man's eye of discernment was way too formidable. If she had thought that this fellow was making up lies to attract the attention of others a moment ago, at this moment, she was already thinking that he might possess true capability. An explosion really occurred before? To be able to tell this much just by taking a look, even 6-star apothecaries aren't capable of such. Indeed. This fellow might actually not be lying. The crowd below was astounded to hear Apothecary Luo acknowledge the young man's words. Checking a cauldron's background and condition was something all apothecaries had to do. But still, to be able to infer so much just by taking a brief look, wasn't this young man's eye of discernment a little, no, way too incredible? Even a typical 6-star apothecary would find it hard to deduce this much. Previously, everyone, just like Apothecary Luo, thought that this fellow was just trying to stir some trouble. But after hearing his analysis, they realized that they might be sorely mistaken. But so what if the searing flame pill was being forged during the explosion? Does that make any difference? Apothecary Luo asked. As a pill rich in yang energy, it was normal for an explosion to occur. There shouldn't be any problem with it. Of course, there is a difference. Zhang Xian shook his head. If you were to continue forging searing flame pill with this cauldron, then yes, it wouldn't have made a difference. However, you chose to forge the spirit revitalization pill instead. The spirit revitalization pill can calm one's nerves and nourish one's soul energy, thus making it a particularly valuable pill. The greatest taboo of this pill is to introduce any possible violent attributes into it. And yet, you used a cauldron that a searing flame pill once exploded in to forge it. Did you think that it wouldn't have any influence on the spirit revitalization pill? This. Apothecary Luo fell silent. Pills forged for the soul required the forging to be done under more stringent conditions, just that, even if a past explosion could have any influence on a pill, it should be minimal. Are you thinking that the effects it would have on the spirit revitalization pill, if any in the first place, would be minimal? Seemingly having seen through the other party's thoughts, Zhang Xian's lips curled up. You would be right if it was an ordinary forging process. However, there's a mistake in your forging process that exacerbates this effect. I remember hearing you say that if the emerald jade grass is placed directly in the cauldron, it would cause a conflict with the wooden cypress flower. As such, it has to be soaked in hamachi extract beforehand. Am I right? Yes. Apothecary Luo nodded her head. She had indeed said such words, and this was part of her forging process as well. The emerald jade grass has a violent nature whereas the wooden cypress flower has a gentle nature. Indeed, there would be a collision between the both of them, and using hamachi extract is a viable way to mediate between the both of the medicinal herbs. However, have you thought about what would happen if hamachi extract comes into contact with the main ingredient of the searing flame pill, blue-stemmed wood? Zhang Xian asked. It would cause a violent reaction. However, it has been years since the searing flame pill was forged, and in the interval since then, the cauldron has been used to forge many different pills as well. Even if remnants of the searing flame pill still remain, it should be minimal, right? Apothecary Luo replied. Blue-stemmed wood would indeed react violently with hamachi extract. They are just like fire and water, incapable of coexisting simultaneously in the same location. However, it had been years since the explosion, so even if a reaction occurred, it shouldn't amount to much. Minimal? Zhang Xian shook his head. He turned to the old man on the stage whom he suspected before to be the guild leader and asked, "This apothecary over here, may I trouble you with something?" "Feel free to speak," the elder replied. "May I trouble you to scrape a layer of this gray tint on the cover of the cauldron?" Zhang Xian asked. "All right." Even though the old man had no idea what he was up to, he still took out a dagger, scraped off a layer of the gray tint, and placed it in a jade bowl. "Do you have any hamachi extract with you? May I ask of you to pour some onto the gray scrapings?" Without touching the jade bowl, Zhang Xian asked. Nodding his head, the old man issued some instructions to an apothecary beside him, and the latter immediately rushed out. Soon, he returned with a calabash and poured a light blue solution into the jade bowl. Tzzzzzzzzzzzz. As the solution came into contact with the gray scrapings, intense effervescence reminiscent to that of boiling water immediately occurred. Everyone was astonished. No matter how dull-witted one could be, it was clear that this was a violent reaction. Should this be subjected under the intense conditions within the cauldron, there was a high chance that an explosion would occur, thus reducing the medicinal herbs inside into mere dredges. How could this be? Shocked, Apothecary Luo's face paled. Clearly, she couldn't believe what she was seeing to be true. An explosion in the midst of the forging of a searing flame pill is indeed nothing, but you forgot about the strong adhesive property of its main ingredient, blue-stemmed wood. After the explosion, the blue-stemmed wood stuck onto the walls of the cauldron, and it is difficult to cleanse it using ordinary methods. While it wouldn't pose any problem in the forging of other pills, it might result in serious problems when hamachi extract is involved in the forging process, Zhang Xian said. Is there any way to solve this issue? Apothecary Luo asked. Of course, there is. Corrosive lotus is capable of neutralizing blue-stemmed wood. If you add 2 liang of corrosive lotus before the forging of the spirit revitalization pill, you will be able to clear away the remaining blue-stemmed wood easily. At the same time, it will also lower the temperature of the cauldron. As such, you won't have to soak the wood incense flower with violet flora water and bask it under the sun for 5 days, thus sparing you of this troublesome preparation process, Zhang Xian said. This apothecary Luo was rendered speechless. As a 5-star apothecary, she was familiar with medicinal properties and could easily deduce the authenticity of the other party's words. After careful analysis, she realized that the suggestions the other party offered were feasible and flawless, and it even boosted the efficiency of the forging process. While there are standard steps in pill forging, one mustn't follow them blindly. It's similar to driving a carriage. While there are rules and a standard set of skills involved, one's driving method must still alter according to the condition of the road. On top of noting the steps, one must also assess the condition of one's own cauldron and environment and make suitable changes. Otherwise, even if one were to follow the pill formula perfectly down to the minute details, one might still find oneself stuck in a deadlock. With his hands behind his back, Zhang Xian turned to look at Apothecary Luo with an aloof expression. At this moment, he seemed as though a highly esteemed, high-rank apothecary. This is the first flaw I am pointing out to you. Chapter 618, I wish to acknowledge you as my teacher. This apothecary Luo was rendered speechless. She had no idea how she should respond to that. The other party's words were backed by concrete evidence, and this left her no grounds for rebuttal. And she wasn't the only with such an expression on her face. At this instant, the entire hall was silent. Is this even possible? How deep of an understanding must one have of the pill formula and cauldron to deduce this? Everyone turned to look at the young man once more, but this time, their gazes seemed to suggest that they were looking at a monster instead. In the discussion phase, you said that instead of infusing one's soul energy into the cauldron, which would cause one to be seared by the heat, one could harness the spirit of a glacé heart grass instead. But have you considered the fact that the spirit infused into the glacé heart grass could react with the Jeki wood added in previously, thus reducing its effectiveness? This apothecary Luo was stumped once again. Jeki would possess the effect of absorbing spirit. There was a high chance that the spirit infused into the glacé heart grass could be devoured by it, thus reducing the effectiveness of the pill. This is the second flaw. Zhang Xian continued, if I'm not mistaken, you used Hands of the Twilight Drizzle to forge the pill. While this forging technique does help to protect the spirit contained in the medicinal herb, it increases the number of steps required for the forging process of the spirit revitalization pill. There are 7 medicinal herbs that should have been added in simultaneously, but this technique forcefully added an interval of 32 breaths between the first herb and the last herb. This results in significant loss in their medicinal properties. The incompatibility between your forging technique and the pill, this is the third flaw. In the forging process, you use lucid frost art to ward off the blaze from the cauldron to protect yourself. However, in the midst of doing so, you inadvertently sapped heat away from the cauldron, resulting in an incomplete fusion of the spirit beast blood essence and the pill. This is the fourth flaw. This is the fifth flaw. This is the sixth flaw. And this is the 27th flaw. A mere grade 5 pill, but you displayed a lack understanding of your cauldron, lack of knowledge of medicinal herbs, lack of expertise in your forging technique, lack of control in your movements, lack of clarity in your explanation, lack of depth in your analysis, and a lack of concentration in your actions, resulting in a disappointing performance. A sharp gleam flashed across Zhang Xian's eyes. Do you think something riddled with so many mistakes is worthy of being called pill forging? Apothecary Luo staggered feebly backward. Paleness swept across her face, and her slim body trembled uncontrollably. The other party's words were like a machine gun, each shot striking her in her vitals, rendering her incapable of catching her breath. She thought that she possessed skill above most 5-star apothecaries, and never in her dreams could she imagine that what she had taken so much pride in would be nothing more than a joke in the eyes of a true expert. Do you need me to continue on with the remaining 100 flaws? Zhang Xian continued. Apothecary Luo's body jolted in shock, and she lowered her head fearfully. The 27 flaws the other party brought up were all true and existent, she had no way of denying them. Just this much was more than sufficient to plant a seed of doubt that would make her question herself whenever she forged a pill. She feared that if the other party continued on, her confidence would be completely shattered. And no, there's no need. Clasping her fist and bowing deeply, she looked at the young man before her once more, this time in admiration and awe. To be capable of seeing through so many flaws in her pill forging, how deep must his understanding of pills be? Even her teacher wouldn't be a match for him. Alright, there's no need for you to feel disheartened. Unlike painting, where one can create a reality depiction work just by strictly following rules, pill forging requires hard work over a long period of time to build a deep understanding of the properties of medicinal herbs before one can achieve mastery. Seeing the pale face and trembling body of the young lady before him, Zhang Xian realized that he might have gone a little too far. Thus, he quickly consoled her. It's an incredible feat for one of your age to forge a pill of such quality, so you should take pride in your skills. Alright, why don't you alter your pill forging method based on what I've just said and try forging the spirit revitalization pill once more. I promise you the results will be different this time. His words were infused with impartation of heaven's will, thus allowing him to win the trust of the young lady easily. As a 5-star primary master teacher, the young lady's soul depth had barely reached 15. 0. On the other hand, Zhang Xian's soul depth was currently at 16. 1, allowing him to win the other party's trust via impartation of heaven's will easily. As expected, upon hearing those words, Apothecary Luo's fragile confidence began to heal. Closing her eyes, she went through the words the young man had just spoken, and gritting her teeth, she replied, "All right." She stepped up to the cauldron. Typically speaking, apothecaries would prepare 3 sets of medicinal herbs in case of failure. She had only used 1 set in her previous forging, so there were still another 2 sets left on the table. Driving her jinqi, she lit the flames to heat up the cauldron. After which, she extracted the medicinal essence from the herbs swiftly, and one after another, medicinal herbs were thrown into the cauldron. Spiritual energy rippled in the air, and a slight fragrance permeated the hall. 20 minutes later, with a deep exhalation, Apothecary Luo's movements finally came to a halt. The spirit revitalization pill that should have taken her an hour to forge had taken less than half of her previous timing this time. She stretched out her hands and pushed open the cauldron lid. Jia! A dense and refreshing aroma gushed out from within, forming a beautiful white cloud. Above the cloud was a smooth, round pill, and what could be clearly seen on the pill was a spectacular, golden stripe. This is an inscribed pill. How can this be? Even though there's only a level of difference between perfection and inscribed pill, a nigh unbreachable gap lay between the 2 tiers. Even 6-star apothecaries would be incapable of forging a spirit revitalization pill at the tier of an inscribed pill. Indeed, an inscribed pill surpasses the notion of an ordinary pill. It possesses spirit, which makes it an existence worthy of being considered as a life form. With a short lecture, this young apothecary allowed Apothecary Luo, who was still forging perfection tier pills a moment ago, to successfully forge an inscribed pill. This is inconceivable. Upon seeing the pill rising from the cauldron, innumerable faces paled in shock. Formation, satiation, perfection, and inscribed pill. While 4 tiers were established to grade the tier of a pill, perfection was commonly known to be the limit. Only those who had managed to comprehend the art of pill forging to an unthinkable level would be able to forge an inscribed pill. Putting everything aside, despite the long history behind the Huanyu Empire Apothecary Guild and the many talented apothecaries who rose from this ground, there had never been an inscribed pill emerging from here before. It was said that only in Hengyuan Master Teacher Academy did a handful of pills of such superior quality appeared before. Every single one of such pills had caused a huge uproar, and the apothecaries who forged them became respected figures in their circles. As such, the apothecaries of Huanyu Empire had always viewed this tier to be one that only existed in the legends, something far away from them. Never could they have imagined that Apothecary Luo would actually succeed in forging one. Fearsome. Apothecary Luo was formidable to have forged the pill, but wouldn't the young man who guided her be even more so? In an instant, everyone's eyes fell on the young man once more with deep admiration reflecting in their gazes. This was the admiration one would only display to true experts. The young man's cultivation might be lacking, but in terms of comprehension of pill forging, not even their guild leader would be able to rival him. While everyone was still immersed in shock, Apothecary Luo finally recovered from the unique state she had been in. Staring at the golden stripe on the pill in her hands, her body trembled in agitation, and she abruptly kneeled down. "I'd like to acknowledge you as my teacher. I beseech you to accept me and enlighten me in the way of pill forging." She could clearly feel the bottleneck which had limited her progress before shattering entirely. In this short period of time, she had gained a lot of insights into pill forging. As long as her cultivation reached the required level, there was a good chance she could clear the 6-star apothecary examination. And this all was thanks to the young apothecary standing before her. It was only due to the other party's guidance that she was able to surpass her limits. In a way, the other party could already be considered as half a teacher to her. If she could become the other party's student and listen to his teachings constantly, her skills as an apothecary would surely improve by leaps and bounds. "You wish for me to be your teacher?" Zhang Xian was taken aback. His purpose behind this act was to win the other party's trust so that he could have the other party concoct the medicinal solution for him. Who could have thought that the young lady would end up asking him to be her teacher? This made him feel slightly embarrassed. "I beseech you to accept me," Apothecary Luo pleaded earnestly. "All right. I'll be your apothecary teacher, but I'll have to tell you beforehand that I won't have much time to teach you." At which, Zhang Xian hesitated for a moment before adding, "How about this? I have a unique forging method for concocting a medicinal solution which could test your fundamentals, mental fortitude, and sincerity. Just a heads up, you'll have to follow my instructions strictly for the concoction of this medicinal solution to succeed. If you succeed, I'll take you in as my student. Otherwise, I can only say that we aren't fated to be. I won't let you down." Apothecary Luo's face flushed in agitation, and she anxiously nodded, seemingly fearful that the young man before her would change his mind. Seeing that he had succeeded in hoodwinking the other party, Zhang Xian heaved a sigh of relief. Flicking his wrist, he took out the great river snake's inner core and sorrow-severing grass. "These are the main ingredients. On top of that, I'll need 1 liang of dragon beard flower, 1 liang of stardust, 3 qian of woodier skin." Zhang Xian quickly listed a dozen of medicinal herbs. These were the core ingredients required to forge the medicinal solution. Noting down the medicinal herbs and the quantity required, Apothecary Luo turned to the elder beside her and asked, "Guild leader, may I trouble you to bring a set of these herbs over?" "No problem, I'll have someone prepare it now," the old man chuckled. These medicinal herbs weren't exceptionally valuable, and they could all be found in the guild. In just a few moments later, an apothecary returned with the listed herbs in hand. Zhang Xian swiftly looked through the medicinal herbs to check if everything required was present. While doing so, he noted that the prepared herbs were of the highest maturity, and he nodded in satisfaction. Indeed, he had made the right choice coming over here to hoodwink a 5-star apothecary. Otherwise, he would surely be unable to gather so many high-maturity medicinal herbs. After all, these medicinal herbs were useful to the apothecaries as well, so it would have been difficult to buy these herbs from them with money. Apothecary Luo swiftly looked through the herbs as well before turning to the young man before her. "Teacher, I am ready. Follow my instructions strictly, there mustn't be the slightest deviation." Zhang Xian reminded gravely once more. "Warm the cauldron for 45 breaths before adding in 1 stardust. 7 breaths later, Add in dragon dawn flower and raise the flames for 3 breaths. The forging process for the medicinal solution required to awaken Yuan Tao's unique constitution had undergone many refinements in Zhang Xian's hands, and the Library of Heaven's Path had verified it as well. Zhang Xian's instructions were extremely detailed, allowing Apothecary Luo to focus her attention on the forging. The cauldron flames blazed intensely, and heat waves rippled in the room. As more medicinal herbs were thrown in the cauldron, the spiritual energy in the air gradually grew more and more concentrated, and the energy contained within the cauldron became more and more violent. It seemed as though it would reach a breaking point any moment soon and trigger a massive explosion. That is a great river snake's inner core. This object contains the essence of a transcendent mortal 7-Dan spirit beast, and the energy contained within it is extremely violent. Even transcendent mortal 8-Dan experts would find it difficult to suppress the inner core's energy if it were to be placed under extreme conditions within the cauldron. To have Apothecary Luo deal with it, isn't that going beyond her limits? The 5-star apothecaries and the guild leader frowned upon seeing this scene. Chapter 619, Limit Revolving Pill Forging Technique. The inner core of a great river snake was the most energy-concentrated part of the transcendent mortal 7-Dan spirit beast, and it could be said to carry almost the full cultivation of a perfect harmonization realm expert. Even the guild leader would find it difficult to suppress the violent energy contained within this thing, and yet the young man actually wanted the transcendent mortal 6-Dan Apothecary Luo to deal with it. Was success really possible? Dong dong dong. Amidst everyone's doubtful gazes, a sound reminiscent of the rumbling of lightning and the knocking of a drum sounded from the interiors of the cauldron. The cauldron's lid danced about its opening, and it seemed as though the violent energy would burst out at any moment. From the looks of it, if the energy wasn't suppressed soon, an explosion would be inevitable. Shit, looks like an explosion is going to occur. Everyone clenched their fists tightly in trepidation. As apothecaries, it wasn't too hard for them to deduce the current situation of the forging. Under normal circumstances, in order to prevent an explosion, one would use one's Jinqi to suppress the rampaging energy contained within the cauldron. But Apothecary Luo clearly didn't possess sufficient strength to deal with such powerful energy. Guild leader. A 5-star apothecary couldn't help but turn to look at the guild leader anxiously. Since the apothecary up there didn't ask for our help, it's best that we don't interfere. Knowing that this was a test for Apothecary Luo, the guild leader waved his hands. While he did possess sufficient strength to suppress the explosion, it would be highly disrespectful for him to dash in and interfere with the forging process. Don't worry. While the situation may seem dangerous, an explosion could be easily stopped by removing the flames. The guild leader thought, consoling himself. The situation before him might look dangerous, but as long as the intensity of the flames was lowered instantly, it shouldn't pose any threat. Controlling flames was one of the basic lessons an apothecary had to undergo. It shouldn't be a problem for Apothecary Luo to do so. Just as he was thinking so, the young man before him said, "Pump in more Jinqi, intensify the flames." Intensify the flames? The guild leader was taken aback. His face paled, and he couldn't help but exclaim, but an explosion would occur. Hung long long. Before he could finish his words, the cauldron suddenly shook violently, and a destructive aura gushed into the surroundings. Cracks appeared on the shaking ground, and heat waves came crashing down like waves. Under the powerful heat gale, Apothecary Luo's hair danced in the air, and her robe fluttered. Run, it's about to explode. That's a transcendent mortal 7-Dan Great River Snake inner core. If it explodes, the whole hall will be utterly destroyed. Lunatic, he really is a lunatic. How can one forge a pill like that? The legs of all apothecaries in the room trembled in fright, and there were even a few who immediately turned around to escape. The might of the explosion of a transcendent mortal 7-Dan pinnacle inner core was equivalent to an attack of full might from a transcendent mortal 7-Dan pinnacle expert. While the hall might be sturdily built, it couldn't possibly survive such immense might. It would be reduced to dust in an instant. The powerful 5-star apothecaries might still be able to stand their ground before such destructive force, but the 1-star to 4-star apothecaries would surely be crushed. They would have to be mad to not escape now. Jai. Amidst pandemonium, the cauldron reached its limit and would explode at any moment now. Cold sweat also dripped down Apothecary Luo's forehead. While she knew that the young man possessed incredible mastery of pill forging and he was likely to be in control of the situation, she still couldn't help but feel a shiver going down her spine. Don't panic. Just as anxiety was tackling her mind, a calm voice behind her brought her back. Turning around, she saw a young man looking at her with a completely composed face, as though he cared not if the cauldron would explode or not. The other party's calm demeanor and soothing voice washed away her worries, and her trembling body found its stability. Use the descending flower technique to put the harmony grass in. Apothecary Luo heard the other party say so. Without any hesitation, she immediately added the harmony grass into the cauldron. Hung long long. It was as if fuel had been added to the fire, and the shaking of the cauldron further intensified. Add in the cotton-eye flower and greenthorn leaf. The voice continued instructing he calmly. Knowing that there was no backing out now, Apothecary Luo continued throwing in medicinal herb after medicinal herb. As more medicinal herbs were thrown in, the cauldron shook even more intensely. But what left her perplexed was that, no matter how violent the shakings became, an explosion didn't happen. Even though the cauldron was clearly at the limits of its durability, it seemed to be treading along the lines of the breaking point, refusing to surpass that boundary. Noticing the bizarreness of the situation, everyone stared at one another in confusion. At this moment, a thought flashed across the mind of the guild leader. His face flushed red, and his body trembled in agitation. Could this be? But how can that be possible? What is it, guild leader? Have you thought of something? A 5-star apothecary asked, and many other apothecaries turned their gazes over as well, curious to hear his view on the matter. If my eyes are not playing tricks on me, this is the long-lost limit revolving pill forging technique. Perhaps due to his agitation, the guild leader's voice sounded slightly hoarse. Limit revolving pill forging technique? Everyone was perplexed by those words. They had never heard of this name before, needless to say, they knew nothing about it. It was said that this pill forging technique was created by a fanatic apothecary. However, due to the excessive danger one would be exposed to when utilizing this technique and the long list of death toll in its history, no one dared to try it anymore, and thus, it eventually disappeared in the annals of history. I only happened to chance upon it while reading through ancient texts. I thought that it was just a legend, yet, to think that it is actually real. The guild leader's teeth were clattering with excitement. Noticing the excitement in the guild leader's tone, the crowd felt even more curious about this legendary technique. The guild leader also didn't beat around the bush. You all should have seen it for yourself. The cauldron has been on the verge of explosion for a while now, but yet, it hasn't exploded yet. Everyone nodded. If it were them up there, the cauldron would have exploded long ago. But for some reason, despite the cauldron continuing to leap around furiously, it simply refused to explode. This was something inexplicable to them. All things, including cauldrons, have a breaking point. I believe everyone should be aware of this, the guild leader said. The crowd replied, indeed. A cauldron would only explode if the stress it was put under exceeded its limits. Taking water as an analogy, only below 0 degrees Celsius will it turn into ice, and similarly, only at 100 degrees Celsius will it turn into steam. Anything within the limits, not even 1 degrees Celsius nor 99 degrees Celsius, could induce such change to water. The same went for cauldrons as well. Anything within its limit would not cause an explosion. An apothecary suddenly thought of something, and his eyes narrowed in disbelief. "What you mean is that young apothecary knows what the breaking point of the cauldron is, and he's intentionally controlling it at this point such that it is impossible for an explosion to occur." The others also found their jaws falling to the ground. The limit of every cauldron is different, and it can vary from situation to situation based on the medicinal herbs one is dealing with. How can he be so sure what the breaking point is? Sure, it did work theoretically, but the problem lay in whether one could accurately determine the breaking point or not. The cauldron, the environment, the flames, the purity of the apothecary's shinchi, and his forging technique. A difference in any of these would spell a difference in the cauldron's breaking point. How could this fellow be so sure that his perception of the breaking point was accurate? It was similar to walking along a cliff blindfolded. The slightest mistake in one's perception could potentially lead to a disastrous outcome. But based on the other party's speech and demeanor, it seemed like he was extremely confident. Where in the world did his confidence come from? I've no idea how he can accurately determine the breaking point either, but in any case, it's clear that he has succeeded. Whenever the cauldron is about to exceed the breaking point, he adds a medicinal herb containing spiritual energy to dampen the rampaging violent energy within. In other words, he's continuously delaying the explosion by using the ingredients of the pill to dampen the energy level. The push and pull in this scenario is similar to revolving in a circle, thus the name of the forging technique, the guild leader said slowly. Limit revolving pill forging technique. I see. But what is the advantage of this forging technique? An apothecary asked. Since such a technique was invented, surely it should have some kind of overwhelming advantage to it. Otherwise, who would risk their lives for it? Advantage? Its advantage is immense. The guild leader swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said, "Everyone should know that the most difficult part regarding processing the inner pill is to melt it. Without several hours of intense flame, it's impossible to achieve. What makes it worse is that one must keep watch over it during this period of time, or else there is a high chance an explosion may occur." Everyone nodded in agreement. The inner core was one of the most valuable parts of a spirit beast, as well as the most dangerous and destructive part of it. It is just like steel, and melting it was no easy task. As such, most apothecaries were unwilling to process it. On the other hand, if one were to subject the cauldron to extreme conditions reminiscent of those prior to an explosion, it means that the inner core is also on the verge of explosion, and its emission of energy is also at the maximum tolerable limit, the guild leader continued. This wasn't too difficult to understand. If not for the immense energy leaking from the inner core, it would be impossible to push this incredibly large and sturdy cauldron to its breaking point. The guild leader said, with a maximum emission of energy from the inner core, it would mean that the fusing process would be significantly faster, thus reducing the required several hours of effort into just 10 minutes. Everyone was stunned. Using such a dangerous pill forging technique just to minimize the time required to fuse the inner core. Wasn't he treating his life a little too casually? Cultivators had long lives, and often, they would spend a month or two at a time in seclusion. To them, time wasn't of much worry. To use such a dangerous pill forging technique just for the sake of saving several hours. What in the world was he thinking? That's not the only advantage. Seeing everyone's expression, the guild leader shook his head. Under such intense conditions, the inner core can fuse better with other medicinal herbs, and the medicinal properties after the fusing would be maximized as well. As such, the quality of the pill would be brought up a notch as well. Only then did everyone come to a realization. Look, the medicinal herbs are all in. The forging is about to be complete. Amidst discussions, the guild leader's face turned grim, and everyone quickly turned their gazes over. Apothecary Luo flicked her wrist, and the final medicinal herb was thrown into the cauldron. The cauldron shook violently for a moment before the lid burst open. Following which, a light golden medicinal solution shot out as though a fountain. In an instant, a deep aroma wafted in the air, and spiritual energy gushed in from the heavens. Deep aroma drawing spiritual energy. This is a grade 6 medicine. The guild leader narrowed his eyes. Chapter 620, Your Teacher, Zhang Xian. Legend had it that a grade 6 pill's aroma, similar to a master teacher's impartation of heaven's will, could draw in spiritual energy that would further raise the quality of the pill. The guild leader was already a 5-star pinnacle apothecary, and all along, he had been trying to forge higher-grade medicine. But due to his lack of cultivation and the guidance of a formidable teacher, he had never succeeded. He thought that the ultimate limiting factor was his cultivation, but upon seeing this sight, he realized that he was mistaken. Even though Apothecary Luo came from Hongyuan Empire and was probably more knowledgeable than him, her cultivation was still 2 whole realms lower than his. After all, she was still much too young. Thus, in terms of who would be able to forge a grade 6 pill first, he thought that he was in the lead. But reality clubbed him in his face. Considering how the other party's medicinal solution had drawn in spiritual energy with its deep aroma, it had clearly reached grade 6. It's him. The guild leader narrowed his eyes, and his body trembled in agitation. He had been paying close attention throughout the forging process, and Apothecary Luo followed the other party's instructions strictly. The reason why this forging of a grade 6 medicine succeeded was clearly the credit of this young man. To be able to allow a transcendent mortal 6-dan 5-star apothecary forge a grade 6 pill with his guidance. Wasn't this just too formidable? How did he do it? Grade 6? Hearing the guild leader's exclamations, everyone's lips trembled in shock. The higher grade a pill was, the harder it was to forge it. It wasn't unheard of for a talented 1-star apothecary to forge a grade 2 pill, but a 5-star apothecary forge a grade 6 pill, never before. Having forged a grade 6 pill once before, both Apothecary Luo's confidence and grasp over the medicinal herbs would surely achieve a great advancement. No doubt about it, she will surely become an incredible apothecary in the future. Indeed. How could I have been so foolish? If I had rushed up to acknowledge him as my teacher, the chance would have been mine. Such a pity. Say, do you think that it's too late to acknowledge him as my teacher now? I doubt that he would be willing to accept any more students. Many of the onlookers expressed their regret toward this matter. As a 5-star apothecary, successfully forging a grade 6 pill was an exceptionally precious experience. Just this in itself would induce a huge improvement in one's understanding and eye of discernment, thus making it highly likely that one would advance to become a 6-star apothecary in the future. If they had rushed forward to acknowledge that young man as their teacher before Apothecary Luo, the chance would surely have been theirs, and they wouldn't be sighing helplessly in regret now. Who? While some of the crowd were wallowing in their disappointment and others were still stunned with shock, the person in question, Apothecary Luo, heaved a huge sigh of relief. She stared quietly at the medicinal solution floating silently before her, and her face slowly flushed in excitement as her body began trembling intensely. Just as others had guessed, her grasp of pill forging had been brought up a notch, and in the foreseeable future, pill forging would become her greatest expertise among all of her supporting occupations. She would surely leave many sighing in awe when she returned to Hongyuan Empire. Impressive. She glanced at the young man before her once more, her eyes gleaming in admiration. Through just the other party's guidance, she was actually able to forge such a high-grade medicine. Even the number 1 apothecary of Hongyuan Empire, the head of the apothecary school, would find it hard to match up to his eye of discernment and extensive knowledge. Teacher. Filling the medicinal solution in a jade bottle, she passed the bottle respectfully over to the young man. Grabbing hold of the jade bottle, a hint of agitation appeared in Zhang Xian's eyes as well. He thought that a grade 5 medicinal solution would be a great outcome already, but due to the unexpectedly high maturity of the mediating medicinal herbs and the lack of errors in the forging process, it actually managed to hit grade 6. If Yuan Tao were to consume it, his emperor's bloodline would surely be awakened by a huge portion, and his cultivation would rise by leaps and bounds. The fact that you were able to forge the medicinal solution successfully shows that you possess incredible talent, and I can also see the sincerity behind your acknowledgement. Alright. From today onward, you shall be my apothecary student. Suppressing his excitement, Zhang Xian assumed an indifferent front, as though forging a grade 6 pill was no different from eating or drinking to him. Despite the threat of an imminent explosion from the cauldron, the other party was actually able to put her trust in him and followed his instructions precisely with composure. Just this in itself reflected the sincerity of her intention to acknowledge Zhang Xian as her teacher. Teacher, thank you for accepting me. Upon hearing that she had been accepted by the expert before her, Apothecary Luo clasped her fists in excitement and hurriedly kowtowed to complete the acknowledged ceremony. Knowing the other party's sincere intentions, Zhang Xian was satisfied as well. He turned to look at the other party and asked, What's your name? I am Luo Qiqi, teacher can call me Qiqi. Apothecary Luo said. Qiqi. Then from today onward, I shall call you Little Qi. Zhang Xian nodded. Yes. Luo Qiqi replied in delight. Alright, I still have things to attend to, so I'll be leaving for now. The stone pillar challenge at the mystical treasure hall and concocting the medicinal solution in the apothecary guild, all in all, around 10 hours had passed. It was about time for the crown prince's banquet to begin, and given that the slots for the cleansing lake were at stake, he had to be present. Yes. Seeing that the other party was going to leave, Luo Qiqi felt a little disappointed. Pill forging is an accumulation of experience, not something one can achieve mastery in all of a sudden. Try to comprehend what I taught you today, and you will surely improve greatly. Having seen through Luo Qiqi's thoughts, Zhang Xian said. Luo Qiqi nodded her head. Following which, Zhang Xian took out 10 middle-tier spirit stones and passed it over to the guild leader. Here is the money for the medicinal herbs. If not for the guild leader bringing out so many valuable medicinal herbs, it would be impossible for the medicinal solution to have reached grade 6. Unwilling to take advantage of the other party, Zhang Xian decided to pay a reasonable sum to the other party. On the way here, Sun Chang had passed the 700 middle-tier spirit stones which he took from the 6th young mistress to him. It's my honor to be able to see a medicine of such quality to be forged within my lifetime. How can I accept your money? The guild leader hurriedly turned down Zhang Xian's gesture. Take it. Zhang Xian threw the spirit stones over. If the other party didn't accept it, it could be seen as that he owed the other party a favor, and Zhang Xian detested incurring such a relationship. Instead of causing possible problems in the future, he would rather repay his debts on the spot. Alright. The guild leader also could tell Zhang Xian's intentions from his insistence. He shook his head in disappointment, knowing that he had lost a chance to get acquainted with a talented apothecary. Farewell. After throwing the spirit stones over, Zhang Xian walked out of the hall. Watching as he slowly disappeared into the distance, Luo Qiqi hurriedly shouted, Teacher. Where can I find you? With his hands behind his back, Zhang Xian stopped, and an impassive voice sounded. Remember this, my name is Zhang Xian. It has been some time already, why isn't young master out yet? The crown prince's banquet is about to start already. Outside the hall, Sun Chang was pacing around the corridor anxiously. Indeed. Yuan Tao tried to peek into the hall, but the doors were tightly shut, preventing him from seeing anything at all. Before entering, Zhang Xian had told them to wait outside. However, 4 hours had already passed, and there was no sign of him. It was inevitable that they would be worried. Besides, the crown prince's banquet was about to start. The motive of the banquet was to vie for the slots of the cleansing lake. If the champion of Hongfeng Empire were to not appear in such an important banquet, wouldn't Hongsher be in tears? Just the master-teacher tournament back then was enough to reduce that 5-star master-teacher to tears. If Zhang Xian were to miss out on this banquet as well, who knew if that old man would be able to take the blow? "Young lady, may I trouble you to enter and call our young master out?" After waiting another moment longer in futility, Sun Chang turned to the young lady beside him. It was the front receptionist who had brought them over. "I'm sorry, but I can't. Only official apothecaries can enter, and if I were to enter without permission, I would surely be punished. In the worst-case scenario, I might even face expulsion." The young lady quickly shook her head. How could a mere receptionist like her be qualified to attend such a grand apothecary conference? But you're all members of the Apothecary Guild, not to mention, you are only entering to find someone. Surely they won't go that far. Sun Chang frowned. They will. Deference surfaced on the eyes of the young lady. Apothecary, as an upper 9 paths occupation, possesses exceptional standing in society. Due to that, it also has strict rules governing its members, especially when it comes to etiquette. It's not like you've never seen how official apothecaries, dressed in their occupation robes, hold themselves with grace and majesty. Just as she was in the midst of explaining the rules governing apothecaries, Jia, the gate was suddenly knocked open. Following which, a large group of 3-star and 4-star apothecaries dashed out of the room fearfully. Some of them dropped their hats while others had their robes torn. In fact, there was even one who, due to sheer panic, bumped into the pillar, and at this moment, was lying on the ground as though a dead pig. At this moment, instead of proud apothecaries, they looked like a group of refugees instead. "This is the grace and majesty you were talking about?" Yuan Tao and Sun Chang widened their eyes in shock. The young lady found her vision darkening at the sight as well. As the front receptionist, she often came into contact with these apothecaries. Usually, all of them would hold themselves proudly, exuding an air that distanced others from them. But now, they resembled defeated mercenaries, stripping of their armor and tossing apart their weapons to flee as fast as they could. Their appearances couldn't possibly look any worse than this. Weren't they listening to a lecture inside? Why were they fleeing like frightened lambs then? Just what in the world was being lectured inside? Apothecaries streamed out of the hall ceaselessly, and every single one of them had a panicked look on their faces. At the moment, Yuan Tao thought of something and swallowed a mouthful of saliva. It can't be that teacher has done something inside again. Sun Chang stroked his lower jaws and nodded his head. Now that you say it, there does seem to be such a possibility. The young master was the type of person who had to cause a pandemonium no matter where he went. Just in the master-teacher tournament itself, he left all of the competitors on the verge of insanity. While he only said that he was going to find a 5-star apothecary to forge the medicinal solution for him, could he have caused some kind of trouble? The possibility would be so low that they wouldn't entertain such thoughts if it was someone else, but their young master. The more they thought about it, the more likely it seemed to be true. Your young master? How is that possible? Don't worry, given that he's only a 3-star apothecary, it's impossible for him to stir something of such scale. Recovering from her shock, the young lady shook her head upon hearing the duo's conversation. She had met the person in question, and she knew that the other party was only a 3-star apothecary. There was a huge bunch of apothecaries of such rank in the guild. Even if the other party did try to start something, how big of a mess could he cause? That's hard to say. Sun Chang shook his head. You're thinking too much. Our guild has a lot of 5-star apothecaries. While a 3-star apothecary might be a formidable existence in other branches, before them, he doesn't mean much at all. Replied the young lady. She was just about to continue speaking when, Jia, the entrance opened once more and the young master from before walked out casually. Farewell, Apothecary Zhang. Apothecary Zhang, if you find yourself with some spare time, our guild would be honored to have you here. If you could conduct a lecture, we'd be most grateful. Following which, the guild leader and the numerous elders of the guild walked out and bowed humbly as they saw him off. Within their eyes, one could see respect and admiration. The young lady burst into tears. Shouldn't that guy be unable to stir anything of sizable scale? Shouldn't that guy mean nothing to you? What in the world is going on? Chapter 621, Crown Prince's Residence, Let's Go. Ignoring the guild leader and the elders who were respectfully seeing him off, as well as the young lady who was crying pitifully by the corner, Zhang Xian gestured to Yuan Tao and Sun Chang before walking out with wide strides. If he had more time, he would surely return here to clear all of the books in the guild. Otherwise, he could only drop the matter. Walking out of the apothecary guild and getting into a carriage, Zhang Xian passed the jade bottle over to Yuan Tao. Apply a portion to your skin each time, and only after you've fully absorbed everything can you apply it once more. Train properly, and your cultivation will surely soar swiftly. Thank you, teacher. Yuan Tao took the jade bottle from Zhang Xian's hands in agitation. Having followed his teacher for the entire day, he knew how valuable the medicinal solution was, and how much effort his teacher put into preparing it for him. The favor his teacher had shown him was so great that he didn't think he could ever repay it. Take these spirit stones. You'll need them when you cultivate. After which, he passed a few dozen middle-tier spirit stones over. The medicinal solution could only awaken Yuan Tao's unique constitution. He would still require a huge amount of spiritual energy to fuel his cultivation. In any case, after the incident with the sixth young mistress, he didn't lack spirit stones at the moment. Understanding his teacher's intentions, Yuan Tao took the stones. Sun Chang, take these spirit stones with you. I might be gone for a few days when the cleansing lake opens, so I'll be counting on you to distribute them to Zheng Yang, Wang Ying, and Lu Yang when they require any. Make sure that everyone, including you, has sufficient spirit stones so as to not delay your cultivation. Saying so, Zhang Xian passed around 200 spirit stones over to Sun Chang. Once the cleansing lake opened, he would have to spend several days inside to cultivate. Thus, it was best for him to make preparations in advance so as to not delay his students' and butlers' training. Don't worry, young master. We'll surely train hard. Sun Chang hurriedly nodded his head. Hearing Sun Chang's confident declaration, Zhang Xian shook his head. I'm not worried about others, you are the one whom I'm the most worried about. Zheng Yang and the others, perhaps spurred by Zhao Ye and Lu Chong, were extremely motivated, and he need not worry about them. The main problem was Sun Chang. He simply slacked off way too much, and the moment no one's eyes were not on him, he would immediately trail off. He was indeed a huge headache to deal with. Ah! Understanding the young master's intentions, Sun Chang scratched his head awkwardly. Alright, these are the items obtained from the mystical treasure hall. Split them among the others, and sell everything else that you don't need for spirit stones. Zhang Xian took out the storage ring Gan Yiping gave him and passed it over. Of everything in the mystical treasure hall, Zhang Xian only kept the Glacier Rain Sword, the upgradable artifact. Everything else was useless to him, so it would be best to trade them for spirit stones instead. Yes. Grabbing the storage ring, Sun Chang acknowledged Zhang Xian's instructions. Knowing that there was nothing for him to worry about leaving everything to Sun Chang, Zhang Xian said no more. In a rush for time, Zhang Xian had the carriage travel at its full speed, and around an hour later, they finally returned to their living quarters. As soon as he arrived, he saw Hongshi waiting at the entrance anxiously. Bai Jianghai and Luo Xian were standing behind him. There was a total of 3 cleansing lake slots for each vassal state. For Hongfeng Empire, these slots were given to the top 3 rankers in the Master-Teacher tournament. Since the banquet tonight was to determine the distribution of slots, naturally, the both of them were qualified to attend the banquet as well to witness how their fates would be decided. Zhang Shi, you're finally here. Did anything bad happen? If something really happened, you must tell me in advance so that I can have my teacher resolve it for you. Upon seeing Zhang Xian's return, Hong Shi became so agitated that he nearly burst into tears. Ever since returning from the confrontation with Luo Zhao and the others, he immediately returned to look for Zhang Shi, but, despite waiting for 8 whole hours, the other party still remained out of sight. The fear that the other party might have caused some kind of trouble started to overwhelm him. After all, this wasn't the 28 regional powers nor the Myriad Kingdom alliance, where Hong Shi could easily resolve any problem with his influence. It would be best for them to maintain a low profile over here, at Huanyu Empire's capital. Otherwise, if something were to happen, they would have to ask his teacher, Pavilion Master Jiang Wei, for help. Don't worry, I only went to the Apothecary Guild to have a medicinal solution concocted. Seeing how Hong Shi was fearing that he had caused some kind of trouble, Zhang Xian was rendered speechless. What the heck was this? What kind of person do you take me for? Am I someone who causes trouble wherever he goes? No matter what, I'm still a master teacher, and I have a reputation to uphold. Under the situation that no one steps on my toes, why would I go around causing trouble? Why are you speaking as though I'm the god of destruction, as if I cause a pandemonium no matter where I go? If Hong Shi knew of Zhang Shi's thoughts, he might have rushed forward to strangle the other party. You said you aren't the god of destruction. Then what about my ghost domain illusory city? What about my celestial chess? What about my book of emptied river? What about my otherworldly demon? Forget it, I should stop thinking about it. Otherwise, even my heart would become a goner. It's good that nothing happened. Alright, the banquet is about to start, so let's hurry there. Knowing that this wasn't the time to speak, Hong Shi gestured to the others, and the 4 of them started walking to the Crown Prince's residence. Crown Prince Yi Qian's eastern palace was only several hundred meters away from the living quarters. Before long, they were already at the entrance, and they passed their invitation letter to the guards. This way please. Upon seeing the invitation letter, a guard on duty stepped forward and led the way. Following behind the guard, Hong Shi asked, This brother here, I would like to ask if Feng Shi from Fengyuan Empire, Luo Shi from Qianfeng Empire, and Qin Shi from Zhuiyue Empire are here yet? Naturally, Luo Shi from Qianfeng Empire referred to Luo Zhao, whom he just extorted a moment ago, whereas Qin Shi from Zhuiyue Empire referred to the old man who was with Luo Zhao back then. The both of them, along with Feng Yu and Hong Shi, were the people in charge of the master-teacher pavilions of the 4 great vassal states, as well as the hosts of the master-teacher tournament in their own regions. They already arrived an hour ago. The guard replied. An hour ago? Hong Shi's mouth twitched. He thought that he could take advantage of the fact that he had arrived early, but contrary to his expectations, the others had arrived an hour earlier than him. An hour. It can't be that the distribution of the slots had already been decided in that time. After a moment of hesitation, Hong Shi asked, slightly embarrassed, Has the banquet started yet? Am I late? If I'm late, it would be bad to bother the Crown Prince. The banquet hasn't started yet. The Crown Prince has gone off to invite the 6th princess and the others and hasn't returned yet. The guard shook his head. The banquet hasn't started yet? That's a relief. Heaving a sigh of relief, Hong Shi flicked his wrist and passed a spirit stone over. Little brother, thank you for bringing us over. You're welcome. Seeing the other party giving him a generous tip of a middle-tier spirit stone, the guard's eyes lit up. His attitude immediately became much better, and he leaned over and began speaking in a hushed voice. I heard that the banquet is to confirm the distribution of slots for the cleansing lake. We don't even know how the Crown Prince is going to determine the distribution the slots, needless to say, prepare ourselves for it. Hong Shi smiled bitterly as he shook his head. I'm not too sure about the rules as well, but I heard that the primary aim of this banquet is to welcome the geniuses from Hengyuan Master Teacher Academy, as well as to allow the talented master teacher from the various vassal states to meet their seniors. Welcome? You mean, all 4 guests from Hengyuan Master Teacher Academy will be present for the banquet? Heng Shi was taken aback. He had heard from Luo Zhao previously that the Crown Prince was going to take away 4 slots for these geniuses from Hengyuan Master Teacher Academy. He thought that this banquet was hosted only to solve the issue regarding the distribution of slots. He didn't think that the 4 guests would be invited over as well. A thought suddenly surfaced in Heng Shi's mind. Could it be that they are related to the distribution of slots as well? The soldier scanned his surroundings before telling Heng Shi what he knew in a lowered voice. I'm not too sure either. But in any case, if they were to speak up, it's unlikely that the Crown Prince would refute their words. As such, Luo Shi and the others prepared many gifts to get on their good side. I think that you should also prepare some gifts. Anyway, there's no harm going the extra mile. Gifts? Heng Shi's face paled. His entire wealth had been destroyed by that fellow behind him in the master-teacher tournament. Even if he had wanted to present any gifts, there was nothing of value that he could offer. After all, considering that the 4 of them had come from Hengyuan Empire, it was unlikely that one could win their goodwill with an ordinary present. Oblivious to Heng Shi's expression, the guard nodded his head and continued, indeed. After all, there's no one who would turn down a present. As long as one can get on good terms with them, it shouldn't be a problem to obtain a slot at all. Alright, the banquet hall is just ahead. I'll see you off here. Thank you. Having been told so much information after the gift, Heng Shi clasped his fist and thanked the guard. Regardless of the time and place, money always works wonders. At the very least, with this information, they would be prepared for what that was about to come. Just that, with this new information came a new headache. A gift? What kind of gift should I prepare to win their favor? If only I still had the Book of Emptied River with me, or the otherworldly demon could work too. Rubbing his glabella, Heng Shi's face turned bitter. If those artifacts of his hadn't been destroyed, he was certain he could have surely made the eyes of the guests from Hengyuan Empire lit up with those. But now, noticing the other party's awful complexion, Zhang Xian walked over and asked, Heng Shi, what's wrong? It's nothing. Heng Shi quickly shook his head. Since what was done, it was futile for him to blame Zhang Shi for it. The important thing at hand was to find a way to get on good terms with those 4 guests. Are you worried over the present? Luo Xian asked. That's right. Heng Shi nodded. Present? If only I knew, I wouldn't have passed the storage ring to Sun Chang. Seeing that Heng Shi was worried about this problem, Zhang Xian shook his head. He had just swept away everything in the mystical treasure hall, and valuable artifacts worthy as a gift was truly one thing he didn't lack right now. Just that, he had given everything to Sun Chang already, and who knew if he could make it in time if he were to fetch the stuff now. Actually, there's no need for us to worry about it now. There is an extremely high chance that the slots will be distributed based on our capability as master teachers. If gifts really work, what will become of the occupation? All those who were going into the cleansing lake were headed for the Master Teacher Academy, so the distribution of slots were likely to involve tests on one's capability as a master teacher. In truth, the gifts could be considered as nothing more than an additional topping, so it shouldn't be of much concern. I hope so. Heng Shi understood this fact as well, but lagging behind at the starting line still left him worried. Zhang Xian suddenly recalled the discussions they had and asked, right, Heng Shi? When you went over to wreak havoc, did you receive any news from them? Oh, I did receive some news regarding the 4 geniuses from the Master Teacher Academy. Nodding his head, Heng Shi was just about to inform Zhang Xian about the matter concerning the 6th princess and her companions when a pair of footsteps approached, and a voice sounded. Hong Qian, are these the talents you've chosen? They don't look impressive at all. Following which, a figure walked over from the hall ahead of them. It was Master Teacher Luo Zhao from Qianfeng Empire. Chapter 622. Late at this moment, Luo Zhao was dressed in a large crimson master teacher robe which looked magnificently beneath the lighting. He held a glass of fine wine in his hands as he glanced at the approaching group with a smile. From his appearance, it seemed as though he wasn't in the least bothered by Hong Shi's actions earlier in the afternoon. Luo Zhao, what do you mean by that? Nothing much, I just feel that Hongfeng Empire has regressed too much. To think that even transcendent mortal 4-Dan pinnacle cultivators could make it into the top 3. TSK, you're truly getting worse with each passing generation. Luo Zhao shook his head as he spoke. Both Bai Jianghai and Luo Xian had already reached consonant spirit realm, only Zhang Xian was still stuck in transcendent mortal 4-Dan pinnacle. Zhang Xian also didn't intentionally hide his cultivation either, so Luo Zhao was able to notice it with a glance. While the 4 great vassal states might not be as powerful as Huanyu Empire, they had vast territories beneath it and countless geniuses. Often, those who managed to get into the top 3 would have already reached consonant spirit realm. Only a monster like Zhang Xian would be able to leave the competitors on the verge of breakdown despite possessing a lower cultivation. Seeing how the fellow was mocking Zhang Xian's low cultivation, Hong Shi retorted, "What's wrong with transcendent mortal 4-Dan? It's not like the master-teacher tournament revolves around strength. You're only saying this because you don't know how fearsome he is. Looks like Feng Shi didn't tell you who the cause of his fall was. If you knew, you wouldn't have uttered so much nonsense." As old acquaintances, Hong Shi had a clear gauge of Luo Zhao's fighting prowess. But even so, he had a hunch that if the other party and Zhang Shi were to be locked in the cage, Zhang Shi would surely be the one walking out alive. "Oh. You look very confident." Luo Zhao's lips curled up. "Just that, I wonder if you can maintain the same confidence you have after seeing my top 3 rankers." After which, he turned around and 3 young men came walking over. The aura of the trio was intensified and dampened as though a flickering light, but if one thing was for sure, none of them were weak. Consonant spirit realm intermediate stage. Hong Shi frowned. "You gave them consonant spirit pills." Consonant spirit pill was a grade 5 pill that allowed any consonant spirit realm cultivator to increase their cultivation by 1 small realm without any conditions or side effects. Only 5-star apothecaries are capable of forging this pill, and the quantity available was extremely limited. Of the entire region, only Huanyu Empire sold it. The bodies of the trio harnessed the violent energy reminiscent of a medicine clearly, they had achieved a breakthrough via consuming medicine. Furthermore, considering how they didn't possess full grasp of their strength, it shouldn't have been long since they made the breakthrough. Indeed. The cleansing lake nourishes one's soul, and as such, consonant spirit realm cultivators benefit the most from it. To think that there would be a person who hasn't even reached consonant spirit realm within your group. Given such, do you think that the crown prince would still give the slot to you? Luo Zhao chuckled lightly. The other 3 vassal states had come to the empire early and spent an exorbitant price to purchase consonant spirit pills. It was fortunate that they managed to obtain the pills before today, thus allowing their top 3 rankers to achieve a breakthrough. Even though there was only a step of difference between consonant spirit realm and clarifying turbidity realm pinnacle, there was a qualitative difference in the physical body and soul of both realms. As long as one hadn't reached consonant spirit realm yet, one would be unable to cultivate one's soul separately. Even if one were to enter the cleansing lake, the effects one could derive from it would be severely limited. This. Hong Shi frowned. He had held the master-teacher tournament at the same time as the other 3 vassal states, but unfortunately, the tournament was held in the Myriad Kingdom Alliance this year, and the Myriad Kingdom Alliance was simply too far away from Huanyu capital. The others had already arrived in Huanyu capital earlier and made preparations in advance. In comparison, his group looked unready. The Crown Prince hasn't announced the rules for determining the distribution of the slots yet. Besides, so what if your men have reached Consonant Spirit Realm intermediate stage? It's still too early to see who will have the last laugh. Even though Hong Shi was worried, he couldn't possibly lose out in a fight of guts. Seeing how you're so confident, I'll look forward to your performance later. Luo Zhao chuckled before bringing the 3 men of his group back to the hall with a wine glass in hand. Humph! Hong Shi flung his sleeves angrily. He knew the other party was intentionally coming over to show off, but he still couldn't hold back his anger. Taking a deep breath, Hong Shi turned to the young man beside him and said, "Zhang Shi, don't think too much into it." "Me? I'm fine." Not expecting to be looked down upon and consoled due to his low cultivation realm, Zhang Xian chuckled. "Right, did you fight him in a master-teacher confrontation earlier this afternoon?" "He did challenge me, but didn't you tell me not to accept it?" Hong Shi looked at Zhang Xian in confusion. Zhang Shi had analyzed the situation he would encounter if he were to confront the trio. The suffered grievous injuries, won't be able to fight for the next 10 years was actually a work of the young man before him. Otherwise, how could an upright person like him possibly think of such downright shameless words? Both he and you are transcendent mortal 6th Dan primary stage cultivators, so there isn't a huge gap between your strength. It's hard to tell who would win, so it was indeed unwise for you to accept his challenge back then. But now, the situation is different. Zhang Xian chuckled. Different? Hong Shi was taken aback. What was different about the situation? It had only been a few hours since then, his cultivation hadn't advanced, and Luo Zhao didn't grow weak either. "I'm here, so you don't have to worry about facing him. I can guarantee your win," Zhang Xian said calmly with pride and confidence. "What you mean is that, you'll guide me in my battle against him?" Hong Shi was taken aback for a moment before his eyes lit up. Zhang Xian's lips crept up. "You actually dare to mock my cultivation? Fine, let's have Hong Shi beat you to the point that even your own father won't recognize you. Consonant Spirit Realm intermediate stage, huh? When your teacher is reduced to a pig head, let's see whether you can get gleeful." "All right." Hong Shi nodded his head. While this young man's master-teacher rank was lower than his, the other party had an 8-star master-teacher as his teacher. Not to mention, he had witnessed the other party's capability in giving pointers, and he could tell that he wasn't a match for the other party. With the other party's help, his chances at defeating Luo Zhao would be increased by exponentially. "Let's go in." After a moment of discussion, the group of 4 entered the banquet hall. As expected of the Crown Prince's palace. The decorations were elaborate, and countless night illumination pearls lit up the room as though it was day. Resplendent carpets were laid on the floor, beautiful wallpapers brought elegance to the room, and many lush potted plants breathed life into the area. On the whole, the entire hall was extravagant and majestic, and its unique aesthetics were pleasant to the eyes. The Crown Prince possesses incredible talent. He managed to become a 4-star master teacher in his 20s, thus becoming the #1 genius of the younger generation of Huanyu Empire. Thus, my teacher took him in as his student and sent him to the Master Teacher Academy. Hong Shi sent a message over telepathically. As such, he's highly favored by the Emperor. As if to reflect that, the scale of the Eastern Palace is on par with the Royal Palace, and its design is even more elaborate than the latter. Zhang Xian nodded. Of all of the palaces he had been to, there was none that could compare to this Eastern Palace. On top of murals, there were also many works from famous painters hung on the wall, causing spiritual energy to linger in the air. Not only so, upon entering the hall, they immediately felt the temperature change to a soothing level. There should be a temperature-regulating formation set up here. It seemed like the talented master teacher of a crown prince was highly favored by the emperor. Walking along the soft carpet, they saw 2 sets of table and chairs were placed at the 2 sides of the vast hall, probably reserved for the members of the 4 great vassal states. Luo Zhao and his group were seated on one of them. Feng Shi, who was nearly shattered to smithereens from falling from a high altitude, was present too. However, his injuries seemed to be much more severe than before. His cheeks were swollen red, and he looks extremely fragile at the moment. This was probably Heng Shi's work. The only reason why he could remain seated without any problems was probably due to the consumption of some kind of incredible recovery pill. But even so, he looked drained, a complete contrast from his gleeful self earlier this morning. This is Feng Shi. Luo Xian and Bai Jianghai stared at one another in astonishment. Just earlier this morning, this man was stood majestically on the back of a spirit beast as he blocked Heng Shi's passageway. While he was an enemy, they had to admit that there was an air of grandness around him. However, with a word from Zhang Shi, he plummeted from the skies, reduced to such a state. Recalling what had been said just earlier on, they solemnly swore that even if they had to offend everyone in the world, they would never offend Zhang Shi. Ignoring Feng Shi, Zhang Xian turned his sight toward the other master teachers in the room. Just as Luo Zhao said, the top 3 rankers from Fengyuan Empire, Qianfeng Empire, and Zhuyue Empire had all reached Consonant Spirit Realm. In fact, there was even one who had reached Consonant Spirit Realm Advanced Stage. In terms of cultivation, Zhang Xian indeed ranked at the bare bottom. Other than the members from the 4 great vassal states, there was a young man seated at the main table placed in the center. He was drinking alone, forming a stark contrast to the others in the room. That man was wearing a robe, and 5 bright stars shone from the Master Teacher emblem pinned on his chest. 5-star Master Teacher. Zhang Xian was stunned. Turning to Heng Shi, he asked, "Is this the Crown Prince?" "He's not the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince is only a half 5-star Master Teacher. That person is probably his senior from the Master Teacher Academy. Based on what I know, he must either be Xing Yuan or Wu Zhen." Heng Shi replied. He had learned the names of the 4 guests from the Master Teacher Academy. Given that the person seated there was a man, it was impossible for him to be the 6th princess or Luo Qiqi. Thus, he had to be either Xing Yuan or Wu Zhen. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to be seated so casually on the same table as the Crown Prince. "Xing Yuan or Wu Zhen?" Zhang Xian asked. There are a total of 4 guests from the Master Teacher Academy, and 2 of the 5-star Master Teachers go by those names. Heng Shi explained. After which, he gestured the group to a table and said, "Since the Crown Prince isn't here yet, let's take a seat." From the information they received from the guard, they learned that the Crown Prince had gone over to invite the 6th princess and the rest of the group. Heng Shi, considering the distance between Huanyu Empire and Myriad Kingdom Alliance, we won't say anything about your prior tardiness. However, you should have arrived in the capital this morning already. To keep Wu Shi waiting and only arrive at this late hour, don't you think you're being a little too disrespectful? Right after the group got seated, an impassive voice suddenly sounded in the air. It was an elder seated opposite to them. The 5-star Master Teacher leading Zhuyue Empire's group, Chen Yu. Hearing his words, Heng Shi frowned in displeasure. His voice wasn't exceptionally loud, but it was sufficient so for everyone in the room to hear. This, of course, included Wu Shi, who was drinking at the main table. If he were to admit his tardiness, considering how he arrived later than the esteemed guest from the Master Teacher Academy, that would be no different from admitting to a breach of etiquette. Given so, he would surely leave a bad impression with the other party. On the other hand, given that he had indeed arrived later than Wu Shi, if he were to attempt to dispute the fact, the results wouldn't be any better either. It could be said that those words had put Heng Shi into a deadlock. What should he do? Heng Shi's face darkened as he struggled to search for a reply. However, at that moment, he suddenly heard something, and his body stiffened. Following which, his eyes lit up, and he turned to look Qinyu in the eye. Qinyu, please mind your words. This is just a banquet, a place that fosters camaraderie and harmony. To be talking about tardiness here. Are you going to blame the crown prince for arriving late later on as well? Chapter 623, Two Different Evaluations. Hearing those words, everyone was awed. Master Teacher Qinyu's question was clearly an attempt at soiling Heng She's reputation. And yet, Heng She actually managed to counterattack against such a difficult question. You said that I was late. Fine. But even the crown prince isn't here yet, are you going to blame him for the same as well? This is just a casual banquet, and yet here you are pointing fingers around. Let me ask you, what are you trying to do? Not only did those words seamlessly respond to Qinyu's accusation, it even left him in a difficult position. He could neither agree nor disagree with Heng She's words, and his face gradually reddened in frustration. He felt so stifled that he could spew blood at any moment. Oh. It has only been a while since we last met, and Heng She has become much more eloquent than before. Seeing his alliance mate Qinyu being placed in a difficult position, Luo Zhao stepped forward and intervened. Not just so, my cultivation also advanced significantly in the past few days. Luo Shi, would you like to give it a try? Heng She filled his cup with fine wine as he glanced to the side. Don't you agree, Feng Shi? You. Pooh. Feng Yu's body staggered. In an instant, his injuries were triggered, and a mouthful of fresh blood spewed from his mouth. Didn't we agree not to talk about this matter? Why are you bringing it up now? Besides, they are the ones who are causing you trouble, not me. To think that I would still be shot despite sitting quietly in my corner over here. Feng Shi was wounded by spirit beasts when he was out hunting a few days ago. He had been spending his time recuperating at his residence, so how could he possibly know how strong you are? Luo Zhao harumphed. Luo Zhao's words were indeed quite scathing. By saying that Feng Shi was hurt by a spirit beast, he was hinting that Heng She was no different from a vicious beast. So, he was hurt by a spirit beast. My condolences. Naturally, Heng She could tell the insult hidden within the other party's words, but he paid it no heed. He glanced at Luo Zhao calmly and said, there are no clear cuts on his face, mostly swellings from region to region. The swellings on his face carry a tinge of redness amidst gray. This is a sign that Jinqi was harnessed behind the attack. The bridge of his nose is slightly caved in, forming a straight line with his forehead. This is clearly the result of a kick. The slightly redder print that stretched from his ears down to his lips, that is obviously caused by a slap. These wounds are obviously caused by a human, and yet you claim that he was done in by a spirit beast. At this moment, a glint flashed across Heng She's eyes as he continued, Luo Shi, may I ask if you're blind? Or have you learned how to spout barefaced lies? You. Luo Zhao's face reddened, and he nearly fainted then and there. Master teachers possessed exceptional eyesight. There were distinctive differences between the wounds caused by a spirit beast and those caused by a human. The only reason why he said the words that he did was to change the subject and alleviate the awkwardness in the air. Who knew that Heng She would point them out explicitly and claim that he was lying through his teeth? Luo Zhao's entire body trembled in rage, but he couldn't find a single word to say. If he were to claim that it was Heng She who beat him up, the matter regarding them blocking the other party's passageway would be revealed as well. Damn it, hadn't words always been his weakness? When did he become so sharp-tongued? Everyone stared at one another in shock. Heng She was way too formidable. Chen Shi and Luo Shi had worked together to corner Heng She with their words, but they ended up being rendered speechless instead. What about me? Is there anything wrong with my words? Or could it be that, the spirit beast that caused Feng Shi's injuries refers to you, and you're feeling angry at having that pointed out by me? Feng Shi replied impassively. Humph. Luo Zhao clenched his fists tightly. He was bubbling with rage, but he simply couldn't find the words to refute the other party's accusation. All right, enough. This is just a casual banquet, there's no need to make things so tense here. Seeing that Luo Zhao was about to explode from frustration, Qin Yu could only step in to mediate. Indeed, this is just a banquet. There's no need to go so far. Feng Shi sipped on his wine. Damn it. Seeing Feng Shi's attitude, Luo Shi and Qin Shi's face darkened. They intended to get back at Feng Shi for wreaking havoc at their place so as to vent their frustrations before the start of the banquet. Who knew that before they could even lift up their legs, they were already kicked in the face. Furthermore, it was the type where their faces were stomped on viciously. The more they thought about it, the more frustrated they became. They quickly turned to the main table to check if they had inadvertently left a bad impression with that genius, but the latter simply continued drinking his wine nonchalantly, as though he hadn't heard the quarrel just a moment ago. That's good. Seeing that Wu Shi was paying no heed to their affairs, they heaved a sigh of relief. For some reason, this fellow's tongue is much sharper than before. There's no benefits to arguing with him. We should wait for the crown prince to arrive first. Knowing that they would only get more frustrated the more they argued with Feng Shi, Luo Zhao, Qin Yu, and Feng Yu came to an agreement. And thus, the hall fell silent once more. While the group over here were harboring their own thoughts, in one of the courtyards within the Eastern Palace, a well-dressed young man stood patiently as he waited for someone. He seemed to have been standing there for quite some time now, but there wasn't the slightest impatience in his expression. On the contrary, he was smiling instead. If Feng Shi were here, he would surely recognize the young man to be the crown prince of Huanyu Empire, Yi Qian. Damn it, it's all that fellow's fault. If not for him taking away my sorrow-severing grass, I wouldn't be in such a dilemma now. Xing Yuan, have you found out who that guy is? A furious complaint sounded. Following which, a beautiful figure walked into the courtyard. A slightly apologetic voice sounded. It came from the young man following behind the beautiful figure. It was the sixth princess and Xing Yuan whom Zhang Xian met at the mystical treasure hall earlier. After leaving the mystical treasure hall, the sixth princess continued looking around to search for a sorrow-severing grass, but despite searching until now, her efforts were in vain. The more she thought about it, the angrier she felt. Sixth princess and senior Xing Yuan. The crown prince walked forward and bowed. Oh. It's great that you're here. I have something I need your help on. Xing Yuan said. Senior, feel free to instruct me. Yi Qian hurriedly said. In the day, sixth princess and I met a young man in mystical treasure hall. That young man is in his 20s, and he was walking around with a plump butler. Help me look into his identity and report back to me as soon as there's any result, Xing Yuan instructed. Yes. Yi Qian nodded. Even though the other party's description was very vague, considering that they were within Huanyu capital, it wasn't too difficult for Yi Qian, with his influence as the crown prince, to search for a single person. Sixth princess and senior Xing Yuan, I'll have this done immediately. Also, I've prepared a banquet for you tonight, and I would like to invite you over. At the same time, you can also meet the freshman Huanyu Empire will be sending over to the Master Teacher Academy this year. I'm not interested. The sixth princess waved her hands in annoyance. She was still a proud princess when she left the residence earlier this morning, but by the time she returned, she had become the maid of another man instead. Angry and humiliated, how could she possibly be in the mood to attend a banquet? Not expecting the sixth princess to reject his offer so directly, Yi Qian turned to look at Xing Yuan awkward. Senior, you. Oh, I'll return to my residence first. I'll be there in a moment. Xing Yuan waved his hands. All right. Seeing that the sixth princess was at the peak of her anger, Yu Qian bowed and left the courtyard. He might be the crown prince of Huanyu Empire, but his standing still paled far too much in comparison to the princess of Hengyuan Empire. The both of them weren't of the same standing at all. It would be a delight if the other party accepted his invitation, but even if that wasn't the case, he dared not push his case. Right before he was about to walk out of the courtyard, he heard Xing Yuan's voice echoing by his ear. Sixth princess is currently at the peak of her rage. I'll talk to her for a bit and come over with her later on. Thank you, senior. Hearing the other party's promise, Yu Qian's eyes lit up. The purpose of this banquet was to welcome the sixth princess and the others. If they were to skip out on this banquet, it would indeed be embarrassing on his part. Sixth princess, calm down. If we still aren't able to find a sorrow-severing grass, we can always purchase it from the young man back then after Yu Qian uncovers his identity. After Yu Qian left, Xing Yuan immediately hurried forward to console the sixth princess. This is none of your business. The sixth princess sat down angrily. Standing at the spot, Xing Yuan was at a loss. It didn't feel right for him to stay there, but leaving also felt wrong either. The sixth princess had an extremely eccentric temper that made it difficult for him to court her. She would be fine one moment and throwing a tantrum the next. As fickle as the weather, she often left him feeling puzzled. Honestly speaking, you were the one who agreed to become that lad's maid. I tried to persuade you against it, but you simply didn't listen. I even proposed to have him killed, but you turned that down too. And yet, here you are, throwing a tantrum before me and Yu Qian over that matter. What the heck is this? The more he thought about it, the more frustrated he felt. Yu Feier, what's wrong? Just as Xing Yuan was at a complete loss, footsteps sounded from the outside, and a lady excitedly entered the room. There was a bright smile on her face, and she looked as though she was about to skip in joy. Lady Qiqi, you. Looking at the other party's expression, Xing Yuan was dumbstruck. The lady before him, Luo Qiqi, was known for her coldness. She would always keep a distant aura no matter whom she was speaking to. Why would there be such a bright smile on her face today? If those from the academy were to learn that this ice beauty was capable of smiling, would they go insane? It's nothing. Only upon hearing Xing Yuan's words did Luo Qiqi notice the smile on her face. She swiftly reverted back to her usual cold expression before walking up to the sixth princess and asked, "What's wrong? Who made you so angry?" Princess Feier was just about to speak, but she suddenly lifted her gaze to look at Luo Qiqi with a frown. Actually, I'm more interested in what happened to you for you to be so happy. She shared the same thoughts as Xing Yuan. Luo Qiqi had always maintained a nonchalant expression in public. If she recalled correctly, the latter said that she was going to the apothecary hall to conduct a lecture. But if that was the case, there should be no reason for her to be so happy. This was contrary to her personality. What happened to me? It's nothing much. Recalling Zhang Shi's dashing figure, a hint of respect gleamed in Luo Qiqi's eyes, and her lips subconsciously crept up once more. It's fine, you should speak first. I'm curious to see who can send our sixth princess to such a huge rage. It's all because of that shameless. But halfway through her words, Princess Feier shook her head and smiled. Wait, why should I speak first? You should tell me who made our ice beauty Lady Qiqi so happy first. Luo Qiqi hesitated for a moment. Alright, why don't we speak together then? Fine. Princess Feier nodded. Now. It's a despicable, shameless, ignorant, and infuriating young rascal. Princess Feier gritted her teeth in resentment. It's a refined, magnanimous, intelligent, and awe-inspiring young talent. Luo Qiqi spoke in admiration. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.